Okay, zoning board, we are live. We are recording. Phone lines are open. Go for it.
Thank you, and welcome to everybody to the Town of East Hampton Zoning Board of Appeals. Our meeting for April 2nd, 2024. We have some scheduled public hearings this evening. Prior to going into a public hearing, I just want to announce that the board is going to go into executive session to seek advice from counsel for a few minutes. So we'll be back shortly. We're going to go downstairs. So, Vice Chair, if we can have a motion to go into executive session.
I make a motion that we go into executive session for a legal matter.
I'll second.
Concur.
Thank you. We'll be back.
All right.
And zoning board, we're back up.
Thank you, Matt. All right, so our first schedule, and thank you for allowing us to do that and waiting. Our first schedule public hearing, the applicant is Andrew Mincer at 67 Leeton Road in Montauk, Suffolk, tax map number 300-131-3-16.1. The size and location is 8,192 square feet at 67 Leeton Road, Montauk on the Sea, Section 1, Lot 32, map number 2438 in Amagansett. The description is to construct 724.03 square feet of first and second story additions, renovate the first floor, reconstruct the existing second story, construct 386.4 square feet of decking, an upgraded sanitary system, driveway alterations, relocate outdoor mechanicals, and to clear beach vegetation on parcel of land containing beach vegetation and dune land, and outside of the town's pyramid regulations. The relief sought is a natural resources special permit pursuant to 255-420 of the East Hampton Town, and two variances are required for this application. Two variances of 1 foot 10 inches each are required from 255-1172D of the Town Code to allow the proposed additions to extend 1 foot 10 inches beyond the pyramid regulations along the eastern and western property lines respectively, and any other relief necessary. The zoning district is B residence, AE flood zone, and the elevation 10, and the secret class is type 2. And council, do we have proper affidavit of service and posting?
I reviewed the affidavits, and everything appears to be in order, and the board has jurisdiction over this application.
Thank you. And whose report is this? Okay, go ahead, Jane.
Alrighty. Good evening, everybody. This is the photo of the notice that was properly and clearly posted on the site. Sorry, I have a little froggy in my throat tonight. So next slide, please. Okay, this is just a shot. I think I'm looking east on Leeton towards Dolphin and the Reserve, just for a neighborhood shot. Something happened and I had a photo in the other direction. I don't think it made it into the file. Next slide. Okay, I'm just standing in the road. Now I'm looking directly at the driveway and the house as it exists currently. Just note to the right corner of the driveway, there's I don't know if it's a white bird feeder. The next photos I'm gonna try and show, I took some photos to look at some of the topography right off of that corner. Next slide. Okay, well, maybe not. Okay, so this is a little bit closer, directly to the front of the house. You can see there's a little wooden boardwalk that runs off to the left or to the west. That's going to connect to a pathway we're going to go down in these photos. Next slide. Okay, this was what I was talking about. That's the east corner of the deck, and I don't know if the shot conveys it properly, but you can see that there's a pretty significant drop-off towards the eastern lot line. Next slide, I think, shows it even a little bit better. It's just important. There's not a big lot, but there's some topography on it. Next slide. Okay, there's that walkway that is taking us towards the west side of the house. Next slide. Okay, now I'm made the turn, I'm looking north, so I'm going to head down that pathway. You can see on basically the property line, and the whole front of the property is really completely disturbed and devoid of natural vegetation. The vegetation on the side here is also mostly, I think, ornamental and maybe some invasives. Next slide. Okay, now I'm starting to move along the west side of the house. Same thing on the vegetation. You can see how cleared that area is. Next slide. You can also see that there's some bamboo coming up along that western lot line, heading towards the back of the house. Next slide. Okay, so now that's basically the west-north corner of the house. Keep your eye on that. I don't know if that's a barbecue or a smoker as we round the corner here. Next slide. Okay, so once again, like an application we looked at last week, the magic takes place in the rear of the property. This is the dune land with the dune vegetation. Some of it's very, brambly and pretty dense, but I want everyone to get a good look at this vegetation. Next slide. Okay, this also I wanted to show how close the current back facade of the house is and the pathway around the house relative to where all that sandy and duneland vegetation and duneland topography begins. Next slide. Here's just some shots of what this dune land and vegetation looks like. Next slide. Same, you can see this is sort of densely brambly. Next slide. More of the same. Next slide. And more vegetation. Next slide. Okay, just wanted to get a couple details of the current back of the house. That's the entrance, needless to say, to the basement. Next slide. And that's the little balcony that juts out from the northern rear of the house. Next slide. Okay, now I'm rounding the northeast corner of the house around that tank. There's a path that goes there. Once you get past this point, again, the vegetation is not, it's cleared and vegetated with mostly, I think, non-native and ornamentals. Next slide. Okay, right as I rounded that turn, I just want to show this is the neighbor, this is the rear of the house of the neighbor to the east, and it appears that their dune land, kind of in the same portion of where we were just looking, has been pretty substantially cleared and built upon. Next slide. All right, now I'm kind of heading back towards the south, just so you can get a sense. Right in the very right edge, you can see the steps, or the banister for the steps up to the deck, and to the left, that pathway and the tank there, that is how close the neighbor's property is to the east. Next slide. Okay, that's the stairs up. I'm going to climb up those stairs just to get a look. Next slide. And I'm at the top of the stairs looking back towards the dune land, towards the north. Next slide. This is looking towards the east. It's heavily vegetated, so it's hard, even though the neighbor's very close, you don't really see them very much. Next slide. That's just, there's an outdoor shower on the east, on the western side of the deck. Next slide. Okay, I'm just heading down off the deck back to where we started on the driveway and the gravel and the disturbed area. I think this next slide is last. And then I just had to take a picture of him because with the little dog with his jaunty sailor cap, whatever happens next on this property, I do hope he makes the transition. And that's it.
Thank you.
Who can resist a dog?
We
and
have
a
the
sailor
applicant
cap?
this evening. Andy? No? How are you, Andy?
Pretty good. Good evening, Chairman Deline, members of the board. Andy Hammer. I'm here with Joel Halsey as well. We're representing Andrew and Susan Mintzner. They're the owners of the house at 67 Leeton Road. I just wanted to draw your attention to a letter that Joel had submitted to the board. It actually goes through everything in more detail. I did want to just briefly touch on them. It seems like you either have a very long public hearing coming up, or people are really here just to the paparazzi for me, but I suspect they're actually here for the next hearing. As you'll see, this property did have a project that was denied by the board in 2022. My office didn't prepare or participate in the project at that time. However, my estimation, that prior application was a huge departure from my reading of the town's NRSP application and variance standards, and how this board has been applying them based on my own experience before the board. I have no intention of rehashing all the particulars of this prior application. I think it's illustrative as an example, and I think even Tyler shows that in his TAM. I think a more balanced approach to this lot would seek to minimize disturbance to the property, particularly outside the existing residence to the north, where you actually have some beautiful secondary duneland. I think Jane's photos were very helpful in kind of demonstrating that, hey, yeah, there's a line in the sand, The stuff that's to the south of that, I saw some, invasives. It basically is not, high quality vegetation. However, the rear of this property is really where you want to focus your NRSP and beach vegetation regulations to prevent that area from being disturbed. That's kind of one of the tenets of our current application. The second thing that I wanted to reiterate is that, we tried to adhere to the environmental conditions which are benefited from the installation of the IA sanitary system all on the southern side of the property along Leeton Road. The installation of this sanitary system, as well as drainage, the drainage structures to accommodate the roof runoff that's being installed to the east, that accounts for all the proposed clearing that we're doing to accommodate the current project in front of the board. The property respects the clearing boundaries to the north, leaving that area completely untouched, which is a clear contrast to the previous project. They had proposed additional clearing, grading, structure, additions to the north of the existing footprint. We did pay attention to discussions by the board on the prior application as well as in your determination, and I thought there were some pretty reasonable requests made by the board. We have a more compact footprint that requires no clearing for the structure outside of the existing building envelope, excluding the drainage and sanitary that I mentioned before, which are, once again, not in the high-quality vegetative areas. While this application is deemed to require an NRSP, presumably for clearing beach vegetation, the areas that we're proposing to install these structures are not typical duneland vegetation. It's a mix of invasive landscape materials, and there's no, we propose disturbance in these areas to install these structures and nothing in the valuable and pristine areas to the north. The biggest issue that we have on this project is the pyramid line on these very narrow lots. They're only 64 foot in lot width. I think the town code under B residence usually requires 110 foot of lot width, so that's a significant difference. There's also a little bit of elevation change, and I think Jane's photo kind of shows it. It's like a dip at the property line where it goes down and then it comes up. So on one of her photos, you could see that you're standing at the same level as the property next to you. However, the property in between is down, I don't know, 1.5 to 2 feet if you look at our survey. You can't, as that's applied to how you would try to comply with the pyramid, it reduces your lot width from 64 feet probably down to 58 feet in some respects, because you're losing 2 feet on either side and then a little bit more because of the pyramid line itself. This house dates back to 1978. That's long before the town had any pyramid restrictions, and it has kind of an unusual, I guess it's a Dutch gambrel. I'm not an architectural historian by any manner, but if you look at the roof line, it's certainly not a traditional roof line on the property. It's by chance, happenstance, maybe the existing roof line is really close to, if not compliant with pyramid along most of its line. I don't know why that is. However, it's aesthetic is not really consistent with how I view a typical roof line in the neighborhood and that you would see in the neighborhood. The pyramid variances we're requesting are exactly correspond to the change in the roof line as well as these little dips in topography. They're depicted at 1 foot 10 inches at both property lines to the east and west. It's not consistent along the length of the house because I believe the front is a little lower and it comes up, so it's kind of like a a pie-shaped slice of the roof line. If you review the plans and survey, it's based on these small changes of topography. If I had to guess, I don't think that's natural topography. I don't see how it could be when they built two houses on either side and there's this little dip. It had to be altered somewhat from the construction of the residences on this and neighboring properties. And I think that's just supported by just reviewing those photos that Jane took or visiting the site. There are letters of support that we submitted from both of these affected property owners to the east and the west. The mass of the actual pyramid violation is pretty de minimis in some respects. The roof line more or less follows this pyramid encroachment. It's not a large variance in dimension, 1 foot 10 inches, or in massing. It's not 1 foot 10 inch along the entire length, but that it doesn't actually provide much head height in that area. It really is just to accommodate a more consistent roof line that's more traditional in some respects. I don't, the pyramid law was designed to protect adjacent lots from construction, the feeling that it looms over adjacent properties. I don't think you can fairly characterize this requested variance as anything other than something unique to this property and these dimensional dips or topographical dips that we measured accurately for the application. In fact, standing a few feet away on the adjacent property where the grade comes back up, it doesn't appear to require a variance at all. It would only be standing at the bottom of that small depression. We did explore eliminating this variance entirely. The resulting second-story addition would be compromised both in function, it would have to be stepped back, lowered, and moved towards the middle, and would also aesthetically not jive. You would have a center kind of proportion with a smaller area. You'd be creating a bad wedding cake, I guess, is how I would characterize it. It's not a self-created hardship. It's inherent in the property, and the current application is seeking a modest addition to the residence to render it at 2108 square feet. That's smaller than either of the adjacent residences and probably consistent with the character of the neighborhood. There are some larger houses as you drive up and down. Based on the board's stated concern that we should utilize previously disturbed areas of the property, footprint of the structure, preserve the areas to the north, we submit this as the minimum variance we can propose that is necessary and adequate to provide the applicant with relief while still maintaining the character of the neighborhood. One other point that is kind of interesting is if you look at the photos, you could simply eliminate this variance by lowering the house. That's a very difficult thing, but if you lower the house 1 foot 10 inches, the pyramid line would be compliant. That's just a very significant undertaking and one that I don't think is justified by the benefit to the applicant versus the detriment to the general health, welfare, and safety. I think the TAN points out correctly, aside from, the variances in the NRSP, which I think the NRSP concerns here are very minimal because we're not really clearing beach vegetation. The balance of the project concerned fairly minor changes to existing conditions that will have minimal impacts to the surrounding beach vegetation and appear to be keeping with the character of the neighborhood. I would also submit that the improvements to the drainage and septic system would also represent a net positive to the environmental conditions of the neighborhood. Other than that, Joel is probably more familiar with technical aspects, and if you have any questions, and I'm happy to answer anything you have. If not, I'll sit down.
Any questions for Andy?
I have just a couple. The house is not being raised, though, overall, correct?
That is correct.
And it
No.
doesn't need to be relative to,
No, I don't believe we're in a
Okay.
FEMA flood zone or anything that would require us to change any of the elevations. Because, as a matter of fact, one thing you could do is sink it, but that's even harder to do than
yeah,
raising it.
the,
It's compliant. Actually, we have a first floor compliant with FEMA, so we couldn't sink
Sorry.
it. All right, so I'm wrong.
what? I'm sorry.
Apparently that we are compliant with FEMA right
You
now.
are
so-
now.
Yes,
Okay,
and
I
we
just
couldn't
wanted
yet sink
to
it.
double check. I mean, I saw the, 12.2, but I just wanted to check. I'm just trying to reconcile where the proposed 304 square foot GFA is happening on the first floor, because it's not clear that the house is actually getting much wider, or,
I believe it
Yeah, you
does
can
get
see
a
it on
little
the
bit
survey.
wider
Yeah.
to the east.
Shaded area
oh yeah,
on
that's
the
just
survey.
right there. Sorry, I was looking, I was just staring at the site plans for a moment, and it
That's
didn't look
shaded,
like
it's the
it.
shaded area.
Yeah. Okay. And then I know what you just said, that eliminating the 1 foot, 1 inch variances would change the aesthetics and also would, make it, the second story, a bit less accommodating. But do you know how much square footage reduction it would take on that second story to eliminate?
Well, you'd be dropping the sidewall by
Right.
essentially 2 feet.
Yeah.
So realistically, you would be stepping your addition back off of that. I don't think anybody would continue to have a sidewall at that length at that side. So you'd be essentially creating an uneven layer cake that would have
Yeah.
a smaller second addition with a smaller roof area.
Right.
And that's the aesthetic that I think would be more objectionable than having a continuous roof line that is consistent with the foundation underneath it.
Okay. And just lastly for me, this is now going to be a 4-bedroom house. So are you adding a bedroom?
Yeah, I believe it's a 3-bedroom right now.
Right, that's right.
Most of these houses were grandfathered in as 4-bedroom sanitary systems, but, we're going to be installing a new sanitary to accommodate the current regulation.
But today you have no pyramid violations at all at the current house?
It's really close. Yeah, it's right at the line. If you actually shot individual, you might find there is a small violation, but you can see the line drawn on our elevation. That's like right on it. I would say, looking at it, the neighbor to the east clearly has a pyramid violation, maybe even to the west too. I didn't explore that, but it looks like it's those two.
It's the addition that's proposed here to the east that's creating the pyramid violation.
That's correct, yes.
And how is it, is that the same addition on the front of the house on
It's
the
actually-
west side
it's
that's
actually
causing
both
that
sides.
1.1?
It's actually both sides, so in the reconstruction of the roof line, that's what's causing them on both sides.
Right, okay.
Yeah, you're kind of
So if this addition were smaller,
1 foot 10 inches.
as you sort of said, if it would be smaller, you could avoid that pyramid.
But you would have to redesign to be down in, the center aisle of the house, which would be, I think, discordant based on, these are cottage structures in appearance, and I think once you start playing with it, you're going to lose the aesthetic that's the character of the community.
I mean, there are several examples, however, of that type of construction in the neighborhood, right? Because that top layer cake thing, I think it's not
I think in a
common
more
now, but it's
modern, in a
happening.
more modern aesthetic or vernacular, that's more applicable. But this, I think it would be a stretch to change this existing house, from the 70s into something that would accommodate that without doing major renovations. This is a family that's owned this house for a while, and they're really trying to figure out how they can accommodate, some more reasonable living space. It's at 2108 or whatever the square footage is. I still think it's a reasonable property or reasonable size residence. The unfortunate thing is these lots, I think the map was filed in 1920 or thereabouts. These are smaller lots. There are some double lots in the area. However, the development of this property and the neighborhood basically was done pursuant to that map. One good thing is when they abandoned the alleyways down the middle, which was done, I want to say about 5 or 10 years ago, that resulted in having more protection applied to these, the areas of the duneland that are remaining on these properties, so that you can kind of line some of those areas up and get larger areas of protected vegetation.
But you're still adding over 500 square feet of GFA space to this.
It's more than that.
Excuse me?
You're adding over 500 square feet of GFA to this.
Yes, we are. I think it's 708 or
724, I didn't think it was quite that much.
still well below, it's much reduced. I believe the prior application proposed 2,500. Yeah, they were close to max out, so we're going to be several hundred square feet below, the maximum GFA is determined by the town code.
Yeah, so you're going to utilize the existing foundation, leave it in place, and you're going to be
Yes.
adding on a crawl space. You have a full basement now, and you're adding a crawl space to the east and to the south.
That's correct.
Okay, and so there'll be obviously excavation going on, and we're right tight to that property line. Well, that's not the survey, but if we look at the survey, we'll see how close it is for you to work to the property line here. So obviously, we'd like to know that it's going to be a small machine or an excavator. You're not going to get a large machine in there anyway. But somehow, some mention of a protocol on how this is to be handled should go into it should be part of the final approval here.
Okay, certainly.
All these areas are sensitive, but you are going to have to do some excavation against existing foundation here. And I'm going to imagine, as a builder would imagine, that you're going to use a small machine. And do the
Absolutely.
best you can, take it all out of the south. But I do want to make sure that we're all aware of that, because there could be a fair amount of disturbance to the east here. And we already, you want to protect that property line. So the fact is here, though,
But the disturbance to the east is going to be revegetated. That, they're putting in their dry wells.
The dry wells.
They're
beyond
putting
as
dry
well,
wells
beyond
in there.
Yeah. I
to that.
realize that. They're going to
So-
be doing that there, but
Yeah, I'm not sure.
This property does benefit from 4/10 relief on that side. It's really not as close as it appears. I think the neighbor's walkway is right on the property line, or maybe right up to it. We're actually 12.7 feet or whatever on the east side. It probably appears closer in the field, but yes, we're going to be installing those small infiltrator dry wells as part of this for our drainage as well. So there is going to be some disturbance there, but we're willing to re-veg over that,
re-veg
which
over that.
presumably would be beach grass.
Any other questions?
No.
Thank you.
Let's see if-
And thank you, Andy, for the reference to bad wedding cake. We'll take that into consideration.
I have a wedding cake joke, but it's not appropriate.
Guns N' Roses kind of song or something.
Good evening,
Tyler.
Tyler Borsek for the Planning Department.
Tyler, do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
So this property is within the Montauk-on-the-Sea subdivision in Napeag. This area is comprised of smaller lots which contain dune land habitat and beach vegetation. Of the greatest concern to the board is generally retaining as much of the dune land character on these properties as possible while allowing for appropriate levels of development. Sensitive dune land and beach vegetation exists throughout the entire area and has been a priority of the board to protect that vegetation where practical. Many of these parcels were developed prior to modern natural resources zoning regulations. However, the dunes and dune land habitat remain throughout much of the area. The proposed additions to the residence include approximately 303.6 square feet of first floor additions to the south and east sides of the existing house, and approximately 420.43 square feet to the second story with a new roof line. The proposed additions create pyramid nonconformity with two equally sized 1-foot 10-inch pyramid variances are requested along both the east and west property lines. It was mentioned that the property gets 4/10 relief. Normally it would be a 15-foot side yard setback, but given the 64-foot lot width, they get 10.24 feet as their required side yard setback. They're not utilizing all that. I think it's 12.7 feet that they're requesting, or they're not requesting, but they're going up to. But they do get relief from the normal side yard setback requirements. The appropriate coverage, GFA, and clearing figures are included in a table in the technical analysis memo, along with comparisons to the previous applications on this property. That table shows that the applicants have reduced the size of the improvements and the amount of disturbance required, and also reduced the pyramid variance request along the eastern property line. The reduction in disturbance certainly helps better meet the NRSP standards with a reduction in the construction clearing and final clearing limits by utilizing the existing footprint more effectively. And the areas that are proposed to be cleared are, as sort of was discussed with the photos, most of those are ornamental vegetation along those property lines. The residence is still proposed to increase somewhat close to the maximum gross floor area, 2,108 square feet proposed, where 2,419 square feet is the maximum allowable, and requires close scrutiny by the board. The proposed decking is fairly minor change to the existing conditions on the property, replacing an existing deck on the south side of the residence. The proposed sanitary system upgrade is located between the residence and the front yard lot line and requires minimal clearing to install. The board should discuss the levels of development on this parcel. The building coverage and gross floor area are both increasing fairly significantly, while the applicant has limited the amount of clearing required. The applicant has reduced the proposed pyramid nonconformities from the previous application and the original submission on the current application. And FEMA was brought up. The parcel, or the house itself, is located in an AE 10 flood zone, so first floor elevation of 12 feet would be required. So in theory, they could lower it by 0.2 feet, but that would be obviously be a large undertaking for a minimal increase in height. Other than that, I can answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Tyler? No.
I don't.
Nope. How do you, may I ask, so I'm looking at the green areas of revegetation, and given how disturbed the, side yards are, I know part of it's being revegetated, but it feels still like it's lacking some perhaps in revegetation. Would you have a recommendation?
For additional areas, most of the other areas are either would at that point after revegetation, most of those areas would either have vegetation on them or have structures. I don't know if there's really much else we could do.
Well,
They
I
certainly
guess I
could
was,
supplement the areas that have non-natives.
I think that's really what I was getting at.
Yeah, some of that's fairly significant vegetation as is, some pretty large trees on the property lines. I don't know if digging those out to replace them with natives is necessary for the amount of construction that's being proposed, but it's certainly an option, I suppose.
Any other questions?
Is there,
I do not.
sorry, is there an easement on the back?
Say that again?
Is there a scenic easement on the back?
No, not that I'm aware of.
That's just hasn't come up?
It wasn't in the discussions, given the amount of disturbance that is being proposed. It's certainly an option for mitigation.
Yeah.
The sanitary upgrade, I imagine, is probably a requirement, although it is obviously better than what's there. Given the amount of GFA that they're adding, the sanitary is probably a requirement, but we didn't ask if it was or not. So certainly a scenic easement wouldn't be a terrible idea. There is some pretty good topography back there, and obviously the existing vegetation as well.
Okay, but you do think it's a requirement for the IA?
More than likely.
Yeah.
It's around 50% GFA increase, if not more. So it's probably a requirement. They were proposing it either way. So we don't really ask if they require it or not, prior to the hearing.
Any other questions?
I do not have any.
Thank you. Thank you, Tyler.
Thank you.
Andy, you want to come up and address anything?
One thing, I did look at the plans, the crawl space that we're putting in, it's a 6-foot crawl space extension. It's not connected to the rest of the house, so I think the excavation there can be fairly minimal. I'm happy to submit a protocol for the board. I'll also discuss the idea. I was kind of thinking of a scenic easement as well. I mean, that back area is a really, pristine area. And maybe it's not pristine because there's a lot of pitch pine in there, but it's certainly topography and duneland vegetation that is worthy of some protection. So, I'd ask for the board, I can have a protocol submitted and also respond to the board about the idea of the scenic
How
easement.
much time would you need?
What's that? Probably 30 days.
Okay.
Okay.
And if the board would like, we can also look at the existing vegetation to see if there's possible to augment. I'm not as familiar with exactly what areas we could revegetate, so to speak, in terms of, general improvements. But, I'll also look into that as well and provide that to the board.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so we're going to leave, that would bring us to like
Public?
May 7th.
Public?
May 7th. Oh, yes, thank you. Is there anybody in the public that would address this application? Matt, is there anybody online?
You have 0 callers. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that'll bring us to May 7th, if that's okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy.
All right, ready? Close it out. In the matter of 67 Leeton Road, tax map number 300-131-03-16.1, I make a motion to close the public hearing, but to leave the record open for the 2 items discussed until May 7th.
Second.
I'll concur.
I concur.
I concur. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
The main event. Our next public hearing is a continuation hearing. I'll read it into the record. The applicant is 117 BVA LLC. It's 117 Bayview Avenue, Amagansett, Suffolk, tax map number 384-1-3.1. The size and location is 20,223 square feet at 117 Bayview Avenue, Hollymere, Section A, lots 40 to 52 in Amagansett. The description is to demolish an existing 1- and 2-story residence and sanitary system and constructed 1,885 square foot 2-story residence with approximately 1,172 square feet of decking, 1,216 square feet of pavers, a sanitary system and driveway, and to construct roughly 108 feet, linear feet of rock revetment erosion control structure on a parcel of land containing tidal and freshwater wetland features and surface waters. A natural resources special permit pursuant to 255-420 and variances from 255
385 Coastal Erosion Overlay District Regulations, 255-440 minimum wetland setbacks, 255-1172 pyramid setbacks, 255-1110, Table 3 of the Town Code, and any other relief necessary. The following 8 variances are required in this application. 1, a variance is required to construct a coastal erosion structure where the construction of a new erosion control structure is prohibited. 2 and 3, variances of 70.6 feet and 82.1 feet are required to construct a residence and decking 29.4 feet and 17.9 feet, respectively from wetlands where a 100-foot setback is required. 4, a 96-foot variance is required to install a sanitary system 54 foot from wetlands where 150-foot setback is required. 5 and 6 variances are required 6 foot and 1.75 feet are required to allow the residents to exceed the relative height pyramid limitation from the western and southern lot lines respectively. 7, a 3.5 foot variance is required to allow the residents to extend at 28.5 feet above natural grade as identified by the applicant where 25 is the maximum permitted for a flat roof structure. 8, an estimated 1-foot variance is required to allow the deck to be constructed 14 feet from the western rear yard lot line where a 15-foot setback is required. And 9, a 98-foot variance is required to construct a PVC retaining wall as close as 2 foot from wetlands where a 100-foot setback is required. The zoning district is A residence, AE flood zone, elevation 10, and the seeker class is unlisted. We held the previous report. Brian, you want to come forward? You're good. It's a continuation hearing, so
Yes.
they go right to you.
Okay, good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Brian Matthews, Kurz, Cooley, and Churon, 241 Panago Road, East Hampton, New York, here on behalf of the applicant, 117 BVA LLC. I am joined tonight again by Nick Greco and Diana Heitz, the owners of the property. We're also here with Aram Tertunian, coastal geologist from First Coastal, Paul DeLandro, physical engineer from DeLandro Andrews Engineering, Ethan Zaweski from TF Engineering, who designed and will install the septic system. And I believe on Zoom we have Dr. Lee Weischer, who couldn't make it here in person tonight, senior scientist at the Woods Hole Group. And we thank you again for having us back here. So as the board knows, we were here first for our first hearing on March 5th, during which we feel we set forth a pretty compelling case as to why the proposed revetment was the most viable avenue to protect the applicant's property from severe and ongoing erosion, why the proposed revetment was consistent with the town's code's local waterfront revitalization plan, why the proposed revetment would not result in any significant adverse impacts, and why this application, which was initially submitted now 3 years ago, should be granted in full. At the conclusion of that hearing, the board adopted a resolution classifying this application as an unlisted action under SECRA. The first determination made on this application, again, 3 years after it was filed, despite the fact that the law requires this specific determination be made as early as possible. We were next back on again for March 12th, at which time another resolution was adopted, this time opting against doing a coordinated review of this application with the DEC, and instead this board opting to conduct its own independent, uncoordinated review. I was at that hearing, and my recollection is that no real reason was given for deciding to work independently of the DEC, but that resolution was adopted nonetheless. Following that adoption of that resolution, the planning department prepared a, quote, new EAF Part 2 and Part 3 that I assume we'll spend a little bit of time here discussing tonight, and we'll get into those documents momentarily. You know, as it relates to SECRA, it's my understanding that the town is kind of going through essentially a town-wide review of its SECRA processes to ensure procedural and substantive compliance with SECRA's laws and regulations. Conceptually, that's great. SECRA is an important process. I think we can all agree on that. It allows issues to be raised, allows issues to be vetted, and allows legitimate concerns to be alleviated. What I feel is being lost in this application, however, particularly as it relates to SECRA, is that this is not a hypothetical situation. This is not an academic exercise. This is not an opportunity to simply look at the boxes and check them off and go through what they call the SECRA cookbook to say we did this and we did that, now we'll move on to this process with no real-world implications. This is someone's property. This is someone's home. So sure, it's great that this process is being followed by separately adopting a secret classification, of having a Part 1 prepared and submitted, of deciding on coordinated, uncoordinated review, and having a Parts 2 and 3 prepared. But what needs to be viewed over all of that is that this process is being done 3 years too late. It took the applicant 3 years and a lawsuit to get to this point when they were supposed to be started, again, as early as possible in the process. That cannot and must not be overlooked. So those are the procedural problems with this application. And now I want to get to some of the substantive issues. As the board well knows, there have been a number of reports that have been submitted to the record. And I think tonight, at the outset, it's important to highlight a few of those expert conclusions that have been made. Those expert conclusions include the following. First, in no particular order, relating to the rate and severity of erosion, it's been found that, quote, the shoreline here is undergoing chronic recession at a modern rate of 2 feet per year and has been since 1954, and that, quote, there is no reason to believe that recession will abate. Next, as it relates to the geocube wall, certainly an important topic of discussion for the board, for the applicant, and for the neighbors. It's been found that, quote, the temporary geocube barrier at this property is not the cause of shoreline erosion. Next expert finding, as it relates to the...
Can you do me a favor, reference the expert when you do this?
Sure can.
Thank you.
We'll get there, respectfully. Relating to the imminent peril of the applicant's home, it's been found that the applicant's house is in chronic danger unless some shoreline protection is kept in place, end quote. Relating to the concerns of overwash, something that's been raised regularly by the planning department, should the revetment need to be covered with sand, it's been found that, quote, sand added at the property as a berm, dune, cover, or compensation for erosional losses will contribute only marginally as a source of overwash. And finally, relating to the idea of revetment versus other potential alternatives, it's been found that, quote, the benefits of an engineered revetment are greater than other temporary options for providing shoreline protection. Now, each of these conclusions are pretty compelling and would certainly be compelling if they were raised by the applicant's experts. But what makes these findings even more compelling is the fact that they were made by this board's own retained expert, Dr. Henry Buchanewicz, who is, and I want to get this right, a distinguished service professor of oceanography at the School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences at the State University of New York at Stony Brook, and the director of the Institute for Coastal Ocean Strategies.
Brian, may I cut you off for a second?
Sure.
You stated in the beginning of this that these experts were submitted for the record. I'm not aware or did not become aware of anything submitted to the record regarding Dr., well, I don't know how to pronounce his name.
Buchanewicz, I believe.
Yeah, so
Your
anyway,
guess is as
I'm
good as
not
mine.
aware, I'm not aware of anything being submitted to the record prior to your letter submitting it to the record. So if you're referring to the fact that you submitted to the letter, I'll understand that. But other than that, this board was not aware of anything being submitted to the record.
Well, I think that raises a very interesting point, Mr. Chairman, and that's what we're about to get into. Yes, the only finding, Dr. Buchanawicz's credentials certainly make his finding worthwhile of consideration by this board when you're looking at this application, both from a secret standpoint and from an endgame result that doesn't meet the variance in NRSP standards to allow this applicant to put in this revetment to protect and improve their property. So we may have the same question, because it's certainly the fact that that report was not submitted to the record begs the question of why not? Was the board aware that these expert conclusions were made by its own retained expert? Is the board aware, as we put in our letter that was filed last Friday, I believe, that the planning department asked the board's expert to edit a report to omit those specific findings that I just went through? Is the board aware, and you seem to be, respectfully, that until such time as our office filed a FOIA request to get a copy of that report, that none of his conclusions had been submitted to the record at all? I don't know that there's a good answer to any of those questions. So now we have a situation here where procedurally, a property owner's application to protect their property, something they have every right to try and do, a property which, again, Dr. Bukinewicz and other experts have found, including the building inspector when they allowed the geocubes to be done, sits in imminent peril due to erosion forces beyond their control, has been delayed to their severe detriment. And we have a situation here where substantively, and I say this respectfully, the record of this application, by all accounts, is being manipulated to fit in with the planning department's predetermined effort to adopt a positive declaration on this application. All part of a calculated effort to delay and deny this application, notwithstanding its need, notwithstanding the urgency, and notwithstanding the fact that every expert who submitted a report here has found no impact. So, it's noteworthy that if and when a court reviews this application, and we hope not to get there, it's the actions of the board that the court is going to look at. The court will look at whether the board took a hard look under SECRA. The court will look at, did the board offer reasoned elaborations for the findings and for determinations that you're making? The court will look at whether the board set forth a rational and reasonable basis for any determinations that it makes. On the record so far, I don't think any of those questions can be answered in the affirmative. So in addition to what's been discussed already, the lack of any hard look or reasoned elaboration is evidenced by the, quote, new parts 2 and part 3 that were submitted and prepared by the planning department, pardon me. Despite the voluminous submissions that have been made by the applicants and their team of credentialed experts, hours of expert testimony at the prior hearing, the new part 2 and part 3 don't contain any discussion of those new submissions or any of that expert testimony. They contain no mention or discussion or even acknowledgement of Dr. Bukinewicz's report and his findings, many of which directly rebut some of the conclusions and speculative statements that are contained in the part 2 and part 3 that was just submitted. Instead, when you look at them, the parts 2 and part 3 that were prepared and submitted on Thursday or Friday, they're verbatim, substantially unchanged from the ones that were prepared improperly back in November and initially submitted in response to this application. So, unfortunately, it is abundantly clear that despite the statutory obligations contained in the town code and elsewhere to be objective and to undertake a technical and professional analysis of this application and to provide assistance to the public, applicants, and their agents, the planning department has instead taken on the role of advocate, or more accurately, adversary, in this application process, and has determined from the outset to advance speculative positions unsupported by any objective data that support their desired outcome, rather than offering a professional analysis to this board to allow the board to properly review the merits of this application, to allow the board to determine whether or not it meets the variance and NRSP standards. At this point, again, nothing to say lightly, but at this point, we question whether or not the board can rely on a single statement or conclusion that the planning department has advanced, particularly given the department has effectively censored and silenced the expert that was retained by this board. And I think that's an important point. By resolution 2024-296 of 2024, the town board authorized the zoning board to retain Dr. Bukinewicz, not the planning department. And certainly didn't authorize the planning department to decide what expert conclusions should be advanced to the board, to the public, and put in the record. That fact aside, if it's this board's intention to adopt a positive declaration based on this record, which includes the board, which would then have to include the board ignoring its own expert and adopting the speculative conclusions of the planning department, I feel comfortable inserting that that positive declaration wouldn't withstand any judicial scrutiny. There are credentials experts here retained by the applicant and the town. They have uniformly concluded that the best way to address the erosion problems on this property is the proposed revetment, and that the revetment as proposed here would not have any significant adverse impacts. If the board has genuine concerns that you want the applicant to address, then let's have that discussion. Let's have that discussion as part collaboratively and work towards what we talked about previously and we put in our memo of law of a condition negative declaration that meets everyone's goals and objectives. It allows the applicant to improve and protect their property and allows the town to have its legitimate concerns addressed. Lastly, just very quickly as it relates to the local waterfront revitalization plan, we know that the town code states that if there are no other viable options, which is what each of the experts have concluded, that there are no other viable options, then the proposed action is deemed to be consistent with the LWRP. And further, under town code, if the planning department feels that the proposed revetment is inconsistent, the obligation is on them to put forth how it can become consistent. That's not been done here. Another town code statutory obligation that's not been met. So that being said, I'm going to turn the podium over to our experts to address some concerns and questions that have been raised by the board at the last hearing and in the documents that have been released since then. But before I do so, again, I implore the board, be cognizant of your obligations, be cognizant of the very real issues that the applicant and their property are facing, and be cognizant of the way this application has been handled from the outset, and realize that the collaborative approach that I'm talking about is the only way to get to a good result here for everybody. So unless there's questions for me.
Well, I think we're going to move on, but the experts that you have today, are they bringing in, like, last hearing, they had an opportunity to speak. Are they bringing in new or are they arguing old? But
No, yeah.
Okay,
I mean,
fine.
there were questions raised, and then items stayed raised in the parts 2 and part 3 that were just
Okay, fine.
uploaded.
Okay,
But,
thank you.
okay, thank you. Aaron, do you want to get up first? Thank you.
How are you, Aaron?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak this evening. There was a couple of questions that came up in the discussion that the board raised, and I just wanted to quickly address them. I didn't bring any rocks this time, so we don't have to do that. I think the chairman raised a question of have we looked at the impacts to the wetland, which are directly west and one property east of this lot? And the answer is yes, we have. And the conclusion is that this project will not have a significant adverse impact on those wetlands. In the report that Mr. Matthews just referenced from Dr. Bokaniewicz, I agree with his conclusion, which is to the west, the wetlands are more or less protected by two headlands, which are the headland at Mulford Lane and the headland that would be here at Bayview, and that would create a stable shoreline between them, and therefore there would be minimal impact as a result of this project. To the west, there's going to be continued overwash, and as I took you through a lengthy slideshow last time, I won't do it again, and again, the amount of overwash that would be associated with this structure would be minimal in comparison to what's occurring naturally and historically. I think Mr. DeLandro is going to talk about the difference between a geocube wall and a rock revetment. A rock revetment is a sloping pervious rock structure that is, designed to absorb wave impact, whereas a geocube wall is a temporary interim measure designed to stabilize a situation until a long-term program can be developed. So I think that that's a significant difference. A geocube wall is not intended to be a permanent feature. It is intended to be an interim temporary feature. The other thing that was brought up was about the characterization of cobble fill, and this came up again in the part 2 and 3. And the cobble fill, if you recall, may not even be in the jurisdiction of the board because it's proposed in the road right-of-way. But this is a seasonal beach, and a post-storm beach. In the summer, it's got a nice sand cover, and you go there in the winter, and it's a pebbly, gravelly, cobbly beach. The purpose of putting the sandy, pebbly, cobbly mixture in the road right-of-way is that that material moves more slowly under wave attack. It's what we call in geology a lag deposit, because as the waves hit, it lags behind while the sand is washed away. So it's a natural feature on the beach as it is now, and we're implementing that natural feature in the road right-of-way so that it doesn't erode quickly. It erodes slowly. I think Mr. Landry is going to talk about the height of the revetment, but there are a lot of numbers talked around. But basically, the height of the dais that you sit behind is about the height of the revetment above the natural beach. So it's not 10 feet high, it's going to be 5 feet high. And I think that's important just from a visual point of view. And as far as viable alternatives, my colleague Lee Wisher went through that extensively, but without question, my opinion is that the only thing that is actually going to provide protection to this property is going to be a rock revetment. And we have, it's been designed by a professional engineer to be this sloping structure. There is additive sand fill to go in front of it, which was calculated by Dr. Byrne in order to compensate for the amount of sand that would have been contributed to the system had the property continued to erode over time. So I think that as far as the performance goes, the rock revetment is the only thing that's really going to work. And I think that as far as the impacts go, that the applicant and their engineer and the rest of the team have come up with the most viable method of ameliorating any potential impacts, which in my opinion are relatively small.
Thank you.
Good evening, members of the board. Paul DeLandro from DeLandro Andrews Engineer.
Paul, do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
To reiterate a little bit of what Aram had to say, the major difference between the geocubes and the revetments that proposed is that the geocube structure refracts most of the wave energy that's currently hitting them. It's a very steep face. There's no place for that energy to go when it does hit those geocubes, and that causes much more detriment to the area than anything such as a revetment structure, where the energy is dissipated by hitting the voids within the rock structures. The slope of that also contributes to absorbing that wave energy. Additionally, the revetment's proposed in a different location than the current geocube wall. As far as there was a question asked about dewatering in order to install that revetment. Due to the toe depth of the revetment, with properly coordinated construction, dewatering will not be required. It's possible to over-excavate and it work within the little bit of water that would be in the bottom of the excavation during low tide periods. So dewatering for this particular installation would not be a problem or a requirement. Additionally, the height of the revetment, as Aaron mentioned, is approximately 5 feet, and the flanking vinyl walls range approximately 5 to 6 feet at the worst case. The need for those vinyl walls is to prevent flanking of the revetment and damage as a result of a worst-case storm. They're also important because without that vinyl wall, it wouldn't protect and provide a change in grade elevation for the installation of the IA septic system, which my colleague Ethan's going to go into a little bit further. Sorry, Paul, I just want to make sure I covered all the... And I think that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
One question. As far as the revetment goes, will there be any long-term effect from the revetment related to the adjoining properties, i.e. additional scour or anything? Will that revetment result in any further scalloping or scour
Not that
on
I'm
either
aware
property?
I said not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I want to ask you a question, a couple of questions. We received some technical information last time, and it may be in there, but I'm not looking at it now. Included in there is the depth of the toe. What's the elevation of the toe? So we'll know what's going to resist in terms of a potential erosion in the future.
I believe the depth of the toe is at -4.
Okay, and -4. And then the angle of the revetment itself in order to dissipate the energy as you've described, is that also included there accurately so we know what we're dealing with? when we're
It
reviewing?
showed accurately on the section.
Okay,
I don't
so
know if we
if we
give it.
have it, you don't have to review it, but I just want to make sure we have it. I don't have that particular document in front of me, that's why I'm asking.
It's a 1.5 to 1, so I could get the exact angle instead of a rise and
And
run
then
for you.
given this type of revetment, as we've seen in all these other inflations, they require a certain amount of long-term maintenance. Is that going to be included in some sort of report here? If it were to be approved, we'd have to know what's going to happen long-term to this revetment, because stone or not, we know, as you know, they have to be maintained. There's going to be regular review of that. So some mention of what that is, and if it's in the report, I apologize, I'm just not looking at it. But that's critical to me when I'm thinking about the revetment and whether or not it's a viable option, not for the ecological reasons now, from an engineering point of view. Is it a viable option the way in which it's designed? I'm assuming it is, but I think we have to know that. I think we have
Yeah.
to see those things, right?
Sure.
Because I think that's something that we've seen. That you can go to the Montauk Lighthouse and see with all the work there, they still have to keep working, right? This is something we have to keep thinking about.
I don't believe we provided information on the maintenance or any long-term additional work that could be required,
Yeah.
but we're happy to provide some additional
I think
dialogue.
some perspective on what the maintenance for this would be long-term, and whether, if any decision came forward from us, we'd know how to include recommendations in that area, okay?
Absolutely.
Thanks. Thank you, Paul.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Good evening, members of the board. Ethan Zaweski with TF Engineering.
Ethan, do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
So kind of continuing off of Paul's point with the PVC retaining wall and then the concrete wall behind it, the PVC retaining wall is also helping avoid any scouring from around the concrete wall. Suffolk County Department of Health requires that there be a waterproof concrete wall when it's within 10 foot of the septic system. In this case, we're proposing 5 foot from the septic wall, given the constraints on the site. Preventing the scouring around the concrete wall is, one, going to avoid undermining of that retaining wall itself, so the structure will stay in place. And then two, is also allow us to keep the groundwater, the distance to groundwater from the bottom of the trenches. As far as that, though, there's really not much on the septic.
Anybody have any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Well, we have Dr. Wisher on Zoom. I don't know, I mean, he can substantiate, obviously,
Up to you.
anything, if anybody has any questions for him. I had just one more point before I sit back down, because I know there's a question, and I think, Member Mehring, I think it was from you last time about, two questions about, we mentioned that there's the property owner is willingly reducing their size of their lot. I think it's by like 30%, I think. And where that the revetment's going to be located 35 feet back landward from, I think, where the geocube is well now. So the reduction in the property is really that number comes from, you're going to, the toe of the revetment starting 35 feet back, and then you're going to have that revetment, continue deep, however long it continues. That's not usable property in that regard, and that's where that analysis came from, that, their usable amount of their property that you can have for your structures, and just using property as people do. That's where analysis came from. And as far as whether or not it could be located any further back, it really can't. There's a balancing test here, right? That's not just in the variance sense, but in the very practical sense, is that you have to have, the revetment has to be placed in a certain area where it's best going to absorb and dissipate the wave action. It's going to be placed in an area where you can still locate the house back further enough from it where you're going to have water still come over the revetment and interact. Those storms are going to happen. So you have to have the house far enough back where when that happens, it's not going to then impact the home. And then you have to locate the septic system, which I think is the one thing that the planning department and our team agrees on, that it's in the best possible location. You have to have a certain amount of distance from the revetment to the septic system itself to make sure that is in a safe area, for lack of a better way to put it. So that's where all that came from, and that's why the structures are located where they are.
May I just follow up on that, just to clarify? Is there any specific data or requirement about the distance between the wall and the house and the revetment and the house and the revetment and the septic? Or is it just some?
Well, I'll turn that over to the people with the right initials after their names, but yes, there is. But Ethan, do you want to, for the septic, Ethan can certainly answer that question.
So for the septic, we still have to go through the hearing, but there's one of two ways that the county is going to take the revetment. It's either going to be that the bottom of the revetment is what they're going to consider surface water, in which case we need to be 100 foot. There's no place on the property that we can make that 100-foot work, so we're going to be asking for a variance on that. And then they also might deem the top of the revetment as a bluff, in which case we need 65 foot of separation, and the same thing applies.
So yeah, so you're going for a variance to the Suffolk County?
Yes, we're going for two variances. One is the retaining wall, like I brought up before, and then the other one is going to be the surface water.
And what is how long does it usually take for that variance in Suffolk County to take?
For the board of review hearing?
Yeah.
So right now, everything's on pause with the county until we get the environmental permits. After we get the environmental permits, they typically schedule it in. It all depends on when you submit. If you submit prior to the board of review hearing, you're not going to be on the first one, you'll be on the second one. If you submit just after the last board of review hearing, you might be able to get on to the following one. They typically have it once a month. And after that, you've got 8 weeks of findings where they can go through, they can type up their report, but typically we've been seeing it to be about 12. So after the board of review hearing, you get your findings roughly about 12 weeks later.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Brian? Anybody else? Oh, are you done?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I wasn't sure if you were talking.
All right, thank you.
We're fine.
So we'll turn it over to Brian Frank.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, board members. Brian Frank, Chief Environmental Analyst for the town.
Brian, do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. I want to review a little bit. I want to get into the EAFs Part 2 and 3, but I do want to back up and address some of the some information that I think is relevant and foundational to this application. And I want to respectfully remind the board that the property is properly located in a coastal erosion overlay zone 2. That area is defined in the town code as bay coastal zones, including bluffs, dunes, beaches, and nearshore areas, which are predominantly free of erosion control structures. And that is an accurate characterization of this area, or it was before the geocubes were installed. There is some reference to the revised in both Brian's memorandum of law that was submitted earlier, as well as the revised EAF Part 1, that there are other revetments located nearby, and that's an incomplete statement. I think it's important to recognize that none of the erosion control structures to the east of the property, and there are none to the west for any measurable distance, I hope we can at least agree on that, none of the existing structures, either the shore parallel or shore perpendicular structures to the east, were evaluated by this board for compliance with the natural resource special permit standards. And that's what this board has jurisdiction over. So their presence is there. There's a rubble mound revetment at the end of Mulford Lane. I think that's the best way to characterize that revetment. There are some legacy shore perpendicular structures farther to the east, but generally this area is properly characterized as being free of erosion control structures. And in an area that is free of erosion control structures in Coastal Erosion Overlay Zone 2, a new erosion control structure is prohibited. And I think it bears just a little bit of review that that's kind of the starting point going forward on this application. I also think it's important to note, Brian has said a lot about procedure in this application, and I do think it's important to bring it back to the fact that this application has been treated consistently with other similar applications nearby in recent memory. Brian asked you to put a lot of emphasis on the Young and Lemieux decision, which granted a rock revetment at 157 Mulford Lane in 2012. And I do agree that you should take that into consideration with the other decisions. And when you look at that decision, I want you to keep in mind the fact that that was a split decision. That was a 3-2 decision approval by the board. That two respected local engineers identified that house as being in imminent peril at the time of the application or shortly before the application, either in 2012 or 2011, and that house is still there today. That rock revetment has not been constructed, and that house that was in imminent peril 21, 22 years ago, however you want to measure it, is still on that property. And among other things, I think it just illustrates the unpredictable nature of coastal dynamics and a shoreline's interaction with upland improvements behind it. Again, these were two local East Hampton engineers that both found that house to be in imminent peril 12 years ago. The house is still there without a hard erosion control structure. But that's not the only decision that I think the board should take a look at. That decision was from 2012, and you have several that are more recent. In 153 Mulford Lane Associates, and that's an application that Brian Matthews is intimately familiar with. He was the attorney representing the applicant, and Aram was part of the team saying that that was also a structure that needed to be built. In a 4-0 unanimous decision, the zoning board denied 110 linear feet of stone armor revetment in a determination filed September 30th, 2020. That decision was litigated, upheld, and appealed, and again, that determination was upheld. But that's not the only decision that's relevant in this area. The property that you see to the east of 117 Mulford is 114 Mulford Avenue, 114 Mulford Lane. 114 Bayview Avenue. That's in an LLC known as Ruru Properties. And in that application, the zoning board issued a positive declaration pursuant to SECRA in an application that was requested to allow the existing geocube seawall to remain indefinitely. That determination was, that declaration was issued or filed rather, July 26, 2019. That application was routed to the Department of Environmental Conservation. There was a draft scope, a final scope was adopted. The DEC chose not to participate in the scoping or commenting of the review of that impact statement. That impact statement was started, and I don't know if it's the proper term to describe it, but it was essentially abandoned. It was deemed incomplete by the zoning board and never completed. There was never a hearing. It was never completed. It was abandoned. Aram was also part of that team to tell the board that those geocubes were necessary and again didn't provide any environmental impact and was properly eligible for a natural resources special permit and the required variances. At 393 Cranberry Hole Road, the Curtis property, the zoning board required a positive declaration unanimously in a 5-0 decision filed November 1st, 2018, that also requested a geocube seawall to remain indefinitely on the property. And that application did go through the impact statement process to a final. I don't know if the results of that really matter. The zoning board did not find that it met the natural resource special permit standards. But again, Brian is a very thorough attorney, and to not include relevant, more recent applications when you're pointing to the history, and if I remember Brian's memorandum of law correctly, he said, hey, the zoning board should follow your own precedent, and really just, hammered away at the Young and Lemieux decision as if it were the only decision that the board recently made in that area. I want to point out, both in Mulford Lane and basically in all of these applications, the same process was followed relative to SECRA. If you take a look at the draft environmental assessments that were prepared by the planning department, they were done around the same time. They follow the same general format. There are some stylistic differences over the years, but substance-wise, the procedure was substantively similar, if not identical, to what was followed for 117 BVA LLC. This property has not been held to a higher standard. This property has not been held to a different standard. The fact that the town is looking at how it handles SECRA matters on a global level is, frankly, coincidentally, the way it proceeds. Brian handled 153 Mulford from beginning to end. I don't ever recall anything in the file with him saying that the issue of a positive declaration was not raised earlier in the process. The fact is that the concerns about this application were expressed early by the planning department informally, directly to the applicant and their attorney. That information was presented in the file in November of 2023. The fact that the format changed procedurally really doesn't change the fact that the applicant had, full access to a detailed articulation of the concerns of the department early in this process on. And if you read Brian's memorandum of law that he submitted earlier in the year, in January, you would think that he was surprised at the prospect of a positive declaration. When the history of this area, and this is just the most recent, these are just the most recent nearby examples here. There are other examples from 10 years ago at Louse Point where the zoning board went through a similar process. Also, the planning department, as you would with an unlisted action, raised the prospect of an impact statement to get the information that an agency might deem lacking in the review of something that has some complexity to it. I don't think there's any denying that. But to suggest that this is different or an outlier or being treated differently is just demonstrably false. And I think it's important to recognize that. I have, submitted a copy of the 153 Mulford Lane determination in your file. I have not submitted anything from the Curtis or the Ruru properties. I don't know if that's relevant at this point, and I'm going to defer to your counsel on this. My understanding is that the zone, any board has full access to its files. So I've given you those dates. Procedurally, the board did it a little differently, where they adopted the positive declaration by resolution and sent it to the DEC at the time. The procedure that you follow, again, I'm going to advise you to follow counsel. That's among the duties that they have. I am going to provide you with what I think are the potential environmental impacts associated with not just the revetment, but the residential redevelopment based on contemporary conservation science and, most importantly, the town code standards. As a matter of fact, I'll point out, I do think that if anything is the outlier, it's the Young property, because I'm pretty sure that the Young property is the only erosion control structure that has ever been approved in Coastal Erosion Overlay Zone 2. And I welcome Brian's correction if you can find anything to the contrary, or in Aram in any of the projects that he's worked on in town. If he can recall something to the contrary, I certainly welcome to invite that into the record and let the board review the body of work that they have at their disposal in its entirety. I do think Brian said something that I do agree with, and that is that at the end of the day, the environmental assessment needs to be the board's document. What you have right now is a draft prepared by the planning department. At some point, the board needs to make whatever changes it deems appropriate as a body to make it its own document. Right now, it's in a format that comes from the planning department for the board's consideration, but at the end of the day, you can direct the planning department to make whatever changes you deem appropriate, which is what the board did in the Young determination, to make it comport with whatever decision that you make. I think in the interest of time, I don't want to go through the EAF part 2 and 3 rather, ad nauseum. You have it in your file as a draft document from the end of last week. You have a lot of that substance in your file in various formats earlier than that. But that's really the document and I advise you to work from. And again, make whatever findings, make whatever changes based on comments that you hear from the planning department, the applicant, and the public to make the document your own. And that's what you're doing. I think Brian, in a lot of his submissions to the board, ascribes a lot more influence or authority to me than I have. I've worked with this board in various forms for a very long time. You know that the planning department works as an advisory capacity, and in this application, like any other application, I expect you to take the planning department's recommendations into consideration. I don't expect you to sit up there like 5 bobbleheads and just nod at anything that I say. This board has never worked that way. I don't expect you ever will work that way. So I just want to put that out there that, you are, anyway. But I do want to hit some of the highlights. The EAF Part 2 short form is just that. It's a short form. It has 11 questions associated with it that you basically break down that impact into no or a small impact or a moderate to large impact. And in, I believe it's 5 of the 11 questions, the planning department has identified potentially moderate to large adverse environmental impacts. And in an addendum to the Part 3, the planning department provides a substantiation as to why a moderate to large impact was identified for material conflict with an adopted land use plan or zoning regulation, with the impairment of character or quality of an existing community, with the impact that the to the environmental characteristics that contributed or caused the establishment of a critical environmental area. The results is a change to natural resources, which includes wetland, water bodies, groundwater, air quality, flora, and fauna, and an increase in potential erosion, flooding, or drainage problems. The draft includes an articulated elaboration on each of those questions as to why a moderate to large impact was identified. And I think that the applicants have told you why the impacts are what they believe they are, which are slight, and I don't want to take the risk of paraphrasing their assessment, but I would still respectfully offer that they really haven't pointed to anything in the answer to those questions that's factually inaccurate. They've attacked me. They've called it unprofessional and a bunch of other things. But at the end of the day, set that aside and just take a look at the answers to those questions and evaluate them for yourself. Again, take into consideration the information that you're getting from Brian Matthews and his team, as well as the comments, some of which you heard last month when this hearing was initiated, and will be continued again tonight. So just some, I think, of the more obvious questions that I don't think the applicant has answered, nor will they, is there was a lot made that, the revetment is going to be 30 feet landward of where the GeoCube seawall is now. But they've also said that the erosion is going to progress at a rate. So at what point is that structure going to be interacting with the shoreline on a regular basis? What will prevent the same impacts that are occurring from the GeoCube seawall? Now, we're hearing some conflicting information. Brian, in his memorandum, in a couple of places, says there are no impacts from the existing seawall. But you're also hearing tonight that a sloped wall is going to allow better run-up, that the interstitial spaces between the rock armor are going to basically baffle some of the wave energy and reduce the rate of reflection. So does that mean that that geocube wall is having adverse impacts now? Because that really hasn't been flatly addressed, and maybe it's moot. But again, how much of a reduction will there be? I've seen sloped rock revetments all over the Peconic Bays where they exist. You really don't see a huge difference in how they interact with the shoreline once they interact with the shoreline from a traditional seawall. You see the same end scour at their flanks. You see the same loss of littoral zone on their seaward side. How will the 100 cubic yards of sediment cover mitigate the adverse impacts that may or may not result from the construction of the revetment? How long will it remain as sand cover? How quickly will it be deposited in the wetlands? There was some speculation that the overwash is good for the wetlands, that this is what the wetland needs to keep up with sea level rise. That is not the case. That is not how wetlands keep up with sea level rise. Coarse sand being deposited in a wetland is not what wetlands are made out of. They're made out of marsh, muck, organic material, and that material is spread as a thin film either through sheet flow deposition when something retreats, or very often from the waste products of shellfish, the pseudofeces from mussels, clams, and other invertebrates. That's what helps build the marsh up. How will access along the foreshore be provided or protected, or how will it change as a result of the construction of the revetment? What will prevent the road end from becoming a flood corridor once a revetment is constructed there? If that does become a flood corridor, the wetland will get inundated from its, or potentially get inundated from the south side. I think that is a probable impact, not just a potential impact. I had here that what is the role of the sheet pile retaining wall? This is the first time it's been disclosed by the applicant that it is, in fact, part of the erosion control structure to the east. There's no sheet pile wall there now. There is no concrete wall on the south side of the property now. In a submission that Brian made just today in some dialogue with the DEC, there's an assertion that the concrete wall on the south side of the property is necessary to retain the proposed grades. I'm paraphrasing, that are going to be established with the redevelopment of the property. How different are those grades from what's there now? There's no retaining wall there now. Are there road widening easements that are required, either that are filed or are supposed to be filed, that would preclude the sanitary system from being installed in proximity to that eastern sideline? Now, the retaining wall on the eastern property line does make sense that it would be necessary to maintain the cover above the sanitary system. That's not the case for the one on the west side of the property, and maybe Maybe I misheard engineer who said that that there was a relationship there. Lastly, I do want to remind the board that part of the application is for a residential redevelopment of the property. And among the factors that the board has to consider is this the right house for the constraints of this property? It's a severely constrained property. There are wetlands immediately west of the property boundary and immediately south of the southern property boundary. The shoreline, by all accounts, is eroding. And how is it that a house that would be in imminent peril without an erosion control structure that requires numerically substantial variances from all of the town wetland setbacks is an appropriate candidate for an increase in gross floor area over the house that's there right now? There are permit variances involved here. And the town code does encourage dimensional variances if they increase the protection of natural features. Is there anything associated with those permit variants that the board has seen that shows that it contributes to an increased protection of the wetlands? We have spent a lot of time talking about the revetment along the shoreline here, appropriately so, but I do want to remind the board that the residential redevelopment is part of this application as well. In terms of some of the information that was protected, that was presented tonight, I think taking Dr. Bokanyevich's report was an incomplete draft. It was never submitted to this file formally. It was not used in the preparation of the environmental assessment forms. It was not referenced in the hearing that started this. And I think taking an incomplete draft and submitting it to the file and then coloring it with your own interpretations is a disservice both to Dr. Bokanyevich and this board. I worked with Dr. Bokanyevich. I had dialogue with him about this property, but I'm not comfortable adding information to the file based on those interactions when, again, as it turns out, he was not formally retained by the town. There was no contract for his work. That's why the draft was never completed. That's why there is no report to him in the file. And to consider that information again, to take something that's incomplete, submit it to the file, and hang your hat on it, I think is wrong. Again, I just one note about the time frame. I do want the board to recognize that a year of the 3 years that Brian loves to repeatedly hammer was a stay at the applicant's request. I looked back at my emails with Mr. Greco. He requested a meeting with the planning department beginning in April of 2022. For various scheduling reasons between himself, his attorney, our attorney, that meeting didn't happen until June. After that meeting, there was a formal request to hold off on the review of the application until revisions were submitted. The revisions took the form of that fairly substantial green binder that you received on March 31st. So Brian has had a lot of fun speculating on intentional delays, and I just want to make it clear that has not been the case. It never has been the case.
So Brian, with that, is it fair to assess that EAF Part 1 is delayed by 3 years based on that assertion?
Well, you didn't have it for 3 years, so I don't know that that's unfair.
Okay.
Just a point of clarification here. I don't think the planning department ever said that geocubes were the cause of the erosion in that area. There was an erosion problem here before the geocubes were ever installed. But it is the planning department's position that the geocubes have exacerbated the erosion. I think that is demonstrably obvious from the photographs that have been submitted to the file. And I think it's reasonable to speculate that another erosion control structure, sloped or not, is going to at least has the potential to have the same environmental impacts that you can see with your own eyes. You could see the beach lowering, you could see the flank erosion, you could see the deposition of the sand in runnels or plumes in select areas of the area immediately adjacent to the west side of the sandbag wall. I don't know what marginally contributing to overwash means. How much is marginally? And is that an impact? That's kind of the soft word that I think both Brian and Aram used to describe what would happen if, from the sand cover there, that it would marginally contribute to erosion. I'm not sure what that means. Again, Brian mentioned that the court would, if this gets as far as a court is going to look at the board's action, and I agree. Not necessarily the planning department's actions, but the board. You guys are the ones in charge here. This is the application that you're going to make findings on, and I think a lot of the other information in there. Well, anyway, I want you to just keep that in mind. Brian also said if an action is not consistent with the LWRP, it's somehow the board's job to make it consistent with the LWRP. And how do you do that if you don't assess alternatives, look at the impacts in greater depth, and identify ways to possibly mitigate them or avoid them? And the vessel to do that, or one vessel to do that, is the impact statement process. And that's why the planning department has presented that as an option for the board, because that is the avenue that exists to explore potential significant adverse environmental impacts associated with an unlisted or a type 1 action. Again, I think Aram's statement about cobble is just not true. This is a cobble beach. The beach is the cobble that exists in that beach and in that littoral zone and on the beach itself is deposited naturally. It's distributed in an almost random location. Taking a mix of stone, the stones that were dumped on the dais last month are stones similar to that, mixing that with some sand and putting it in the road end, the sand is going to wash away first, and what you're going to have left is a pile of rocks. That is almost certain. Again, maybe that doesn't matter as much now because that's in the road right-of-way. There's real questionable jurisdiction about whether the applicant can act unilaterally within the road right-of-way without an urban renewal map modification. And again, that is something that would be covered as part of presumably an impact statement review if it were identified in the scope. I had the profile of the revetment up on the screen a little earlier, and I can bring it up if you want. The height of the revetment is 10 feet above sea level. The elevation of the wetlands to the west are variable, but it's anywhere from 3 feet to 1 foot above sea level. So this height of it's 5 feet up, about the height of the dais there. I'm not really sure what that's based on. We can bring that up again at the applicant's request, but again, your revetment height is designed to a 10-foot elevation using whatever datum they used. So that's kind of the information that I wanted to make sure the board had tonight. If I can answer any questions, I will.
Well, one I'm going to have is that we've heard from the applicant's experts about how they consider the revetment is not going to cause any long-term damage that's significant, is insignificant. They've actually been made stronger statements than that, saying there's almost no damage going to happen from the revetment. And you've made statements that obviously defending what you've seen happen in other locations. I'm just wondering, in light of what we've heard from the applicant, what is your reaction to that kind of absolute statement that there's going to be very little damage? I think you've already said it, but to me, this is a plot where there's a real division between what we're hearing from two sides. And I think it's important for us to know that when we move forward in considering the revetment, just how we're going to make judgments on what we should value here in an opinion. And I think that what you're looking at here for me is, we've all seen revetments and we see some potential damages. Is that the case in this location or not the case in this location that has been asserted by the applicant?
Well, in my experience, both as a professional for East Hampton town and as an outdoor person who spends his time along the shoreline when he can, any place I see an erosion control structure, sloped or vertical, interact with the shoreline on a regular basis, you see adverse impacts to one extent or another. I've seen it I've spent a lot of time on Peconic Bay in Hampton Bays. I've seen it in other parts of other parts of the island further west. And I've seen it on a regular basis throughout my career in East Hampton town here. So if you have a substantial stone structure interacting with a shoreline on a regular basis, you are going to have a certain amount of scour, wave reflection, and flank erosion. Quantifying that in terms of marginal, minor, or again, I don't want to put words in the applicant's mouth. But the question for the board is, is there a potential for significant adverse environmental impacts? And I'm going to suggest to you that the answer is objectively yes.
Is there a potential here that what we're looking at for this particular revetment is significantly different than we'd see in other revetments other places. Is the wave action here, in your opinion, any different than it might be in other places? Is the current going to have a different effect on how it reacts? I know what you're talking about, revetments, and I see what happens in certain places. Is there a contention, though, that this is a more unique or significantly different location for an revetment, or in your mind, not so?
I don't know what that distinction would be. This is not a sheltered area, obviously. It's exposed. I can't think of something distinct about this location that would make the impacts that we have seen from other hard erosion control structures absent at this property,
Okay.
or minimal.
Yeah, thanks.
Questions? I have one. In Brian's March 29th letter to the board, he asserts that the town's planning department's assertions are unsupported by objective or empirical data, and that the planning department's speculations is neither rational nor supportable. Can you address that?
No, I can't, because all I could do is ask you to take a look at the draft Part 2 and Part 3, in particular the Part 3. You know, if the form just had a bunch of check boxes with yes without an elaboration, I would think, well, you know, he's got a point. You didn't. But for every potential adverse impact that the planning department identified, I've given you a narrative based largely on the code as to why I think there's a potential for those impacts to occur. And I think at this point, it's up to the board to decide if you have enough information to, I'm not even going to go as far as to say agree with them, but take a look at that information and evaluate it for yourself is kind of all I can suggest.
Thank you. Okay, good. Jeremy, would you like to address?
Good evening, members of the board. Jeremy Samuelson, East Hampton Town Planning.
Swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Absolutely. So I'm glad you asked the question that you did, Mr. Chairman. I think it's actually a really easy application for us to figure out how to feel about. You know, Mr. Matthews has, and I hate to personalize these things, but Mr. Matthews has said some pretty, pointed comments about how the application has either been moved through the system or processed, or the speed, or people's secret desires, or what their real beliefs are. I think what I need you to actually please focus on is the code. This application is prohibited by the code. Full stop. There's no off-ramp that says, well, you can do it if. In this zone, this application is prohibited. Full stop. It's prohibited by the LWRP. It's prohibited by your zoning code. It's prohibited by the comp plan. It's prohibited by your erosion control standards. And it's prohibited by your NRSP standards. So they're basically asking for something that is not allowed. And they're coming to you and they're saying, we want to build this thing that is not allowed to be built in this place. And then they make their case. They very quickly say that in your analysis here, you're treating me differently. And the short answer is that's not true. Brian gave you a list. So they're asking to do something that isn't allowed. And then they're claiming they're being treated differently. Not true. And then they fail to address the potential environmental impacts of what they're proposing. They say they're addressing them, but read the material. There's no detailed analysis that actually responds to the very specific issues that are put forward by the expert analysis of the town's chief environmental analyst, who has 30 years of experience working on exactly these types of applications, using exactly this code in exactly this area, right? So there's no substantive response. So really, I'm reminded, in response to your question, Mr. Chairman, does the planning department have a response to these wild-eyed accusations that have been put forward by the applicant's agent? And my answer is yes. It's what every good attorney learns their first week of law school. If the facts are on your side, argue the facts. If the law is on your side, argue the law. And if neither one is on your side, pound the table. And in this case, the applicant is attempting to lump on the planning department because the facts are not on their side and the law is not on their side. That applies to the law of physics, and it applies to the law of East Hampton Town, and it applies to the state environmental conservation law of New York State. So they're left with nothing to say except that they've been mistreated and to lump on the planning department. So, yeah, I guess that's our response to the alleged substance of Mr. Matthews' letter. In response, I'm going to ask you to take the high road. I'm going to ask you to read the code. I'm going to ask you to apply the code as it's written to this application. And I'd like to read you a section of code. It is 255-5-51. Specific standards and safeguards for natural resources special permits. I would urge you to read the entirety of this section because I think there is no shortage of reasons in this code, which is one reference. Remember, we have the LWRP, we have the comp plan, we have the NRSP standards, we have a long list of things that say this is not allowed. I'm going to read you one. 255-5-51, section F, sub 2. If the application involves a new coastal erosion control structure and coastal erosion overlay zone 1, 2, or 3, this is zone 2, the applicant shall demonstrate that 1, the erosion control structure is immediately necessary to prevent the loss or destruction of a principal building or structure on the applicant's lot, or to prevent severe damage to such building or structure. Let's just pause there for a second. The fundamental argument, the rationale for this application is we need to violate the codes of East Hampton Town. And it's not a mixed bag. It's not like some codes point one way and some codes point the other. Every single code points in the same direction here. And what it says is thou shalt not. What this section of code says, just read that last little bit again. The erosion control structure is immediately necessary to prevent the loss or destruction of a principal building or structure. The building does not yet exist. This is a two-part application. They are swearing to you that they need to build a stone seawall and that you must say yes, that you have no choice but to say yes, because there is imminent harm and peril that will be visited upon them yet, parentheses, for a building they haven't built yet. This is only allowed under very certain circumstances where you have to meet a whole host of criteria to protect something that already exists. How can something that does not exist be in imminent danger of wave attack? It doesn't exist. This entire application is a farce. You have a single choice. And I would say that that choice will become obvious to you when you read the code. So my request of you is to spend time with Chapter 255-5-51. Read it in its entirety, please. And then I believe that you will see that this applicant is being treated exactly the same as every other applicant. The standard they are being held to is identical to the neighbors around them, including the one a stone's throw away immediately across the street, the one that is 200 yards updrift of them at 149 Mulford, and the folks who are downdrift of them around the corner on Cranberry Hole. There's no conspiracy here. There is only code. And when the facts are not on your side and the law is not on your side, this is what you get. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to turn this over. Any questions? Nope. No. I'm going to turn this over to the public. Is there anybody in the public that would address this application? Yeah, you'll be good. Joe, you announce yourself?
Yeah. Good evening, Board. Joe Karpinski.
You swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Absolutely, always, and continuing for the rest of my life. To remember the applicant's addendum that he gave to you the last time, and this is all new information, as always, Chairman. He wrote in that addendum, he knows that this is prohibited by code. We just heard all about it. Remember, Mr. Matthews told you he's been dumping sand since 2011. Didn't become the homeowner until 2017. It was still his dad's. If you like all the trustee documents with his father filing for the sand when the trustees were still the jurisdiction, while at the same time while Rick Whalen was still the attorney with the attorney who might still be the co-counsel for Mr. Matthews at this time, that he was saying the trustees were the jurisdiction until he left. When we go into this whole thing, I'll remind you again, Mr. Johan, when you had said that was a path, remember, that is a road in between. It's the unimproved road. And remember, the fall at the end of the road is over 6 feet, or at certain times just 6 feet. And nationally, 12% of all falls from 6 to 10 feet result in death. Remember, if they want to actually have rocks here, what is the liability insurance going to be? You asked Aram Tertunian, who, by the way, does you still work for the town, Mr. Tertunian, or not? That should be a question that should be asked. Well, anything he says should be taken away immediately. He was asked about erosion and when it started to begin the most and was exacerbated directly by you last time. He said the 80s. When this home was done, when this home was completed, when they took away the wetlands that they built on. And remember, this section right here, this whole thing, I gave you all those maps. That is wetlands that they built in. And nobody would be on this road if it wasn't for my family, the Gandalfs across the street, if it wasn't for Mr. Midget, which you might know his work with Dory's on the corner, and Joe Fallon, former esteemed town attorney in 1968, when they allowed the provision that the barricade would come down. That would be the trustees' barricade from 1873, because for 200 years that was supposed to stand, it was the 200-year storm barricade, because nobody was supposed to build there for 200 years. Remember, you can look at your CART plan now. Who's the only home left in 2070? Hey, how you doing? We'll come to Karpinski Island and have a good time if nobody else is around. Well, we'll see what happens in the potentials. At the end, remember, their tired argument is groins, groins, groins. Somebody might need a swift kick to one at this point, in my opinion, but, you know, that's never been found to be the reason. So when this home was completed, it took away the natural protection, as I said. In my opinion, this went from being a civil matter to a criminal one, because they continuously say that they want to gain from their actions and they won't do anything until it's done. And I hope that that finally gets taken care of. There's a resolution that still hasn't been brought to court, and I hope it does. That was passed by the town board in September about the road. By the way, there was already a court litigation and court rendered decision on that matter as well that you could refer to. Mr. Matthews keeps claiming that his client has the rights while they're denying ours. I don't see how that works out. We don't have to talk about 153 Mulford now. It was already told to you. Remember, lost the court case, lost the appeal. During that July 7, 2020 meeting, he stated, Mr. Matthews, he spoke of the word violate. They wouldn't violate town code, guys, and build past the property lines into the roadway. They did it here. Just because it's an unimproved road, it doesn't matter. I still question the jurisdiction that decided that that was okay. When they talked about those things, Aram Tertunian during that meeting for 153 Milford said temporary is 2, 3, or 5 years. Anything under 1 year is temporary. Aram Tertunian, once again, has been working for the town and getting paid by the town, being on town committees, just like the Montauk Beach Preservation Committee. Remember his tagline for his company, it is preserving your beach since 1975, except on Bayview Avenue, destroying it since 2018. Mr. Greco's court attorney, just so you guys are aware, is Daniel Kahn. That's who our attorneys deal with on the outside on this issue. He works for the town engineering department. So no wonder Aram came with his little bag of rocks and said, this is what's going to be built in the road, without going to the planning board, without having the town engineer approve it, or having the town board approve it. But he knows what's here in the future. By the way, the DEC would give out a permit for anything if you can prove that you have the documents. This board and this town, you can have a much stricter law than the state. Because when I wanted to clear out this middle right here with all these trees, I gave them all of my documents and deeds, and I could have got one from them. I came to the town and said I could get a permit from them to go clear out those trees, not those cubes, because they were still dealing with that issue. And of course, the DEC's been dealing with that issue. But the town told me, we would not allow you to take that down. Those were wetlands in the beginning, when this all started. They have suffocated and taken that away. They were tagged as that when this all began. Once again, Mr. Greco told you on April 19, 2022, he alluded to the fact that he couldn't dump sand over those cubes because in the middle of the road, it's not his property, not his property. He quickly then tried to change it when then you asked him, Chairman Delane, who owns it? He said all of us. You can go back to your previous decision for Mr. Greco's property and what you did, and I gave that to you the last time in that 62 pages of documents, maybe 64. I'd have to look at it. Then again, I have 1,000 documents just for Mr. Greco's property alone, and I have 1,000 for the other one. Once again, you have all the power and authority. And they keep talking about all these things. When they gave you their thing just a couple months ago, they're only going to move 100 feet of cubes. That's only 33 of those sets of cubes. That goes from around the bend all the way to where the road would start with that property line. What happened to the next 6 into the midline? Oh, we forgot about it again conveniently. They also didn't say how many tiers they're taking. To the best of my knowledge, they had back on July 12th of 2023, Laura Starr, who was the one who had issued the permits from the DEC, had written to me and told me that they had asked for a continued use of these geocube structures. So I'm wondering what that's going to be. They're telling you they're going to take it down before they put the rocks here. How are they going to do the construction? And the plans from, I believe it's Delando Andrews, I'm saying the name correct, I don't really care. At the end of the day, they say it's 2 more years of construction. Remember, these 2 homes were only saved because the road was open during Sandy, and that's how they survived. Remember, 1996, the town of East Hampton and the town engineer, Vinnie Gordiello, quoted in the East Hampton Star, along with other departments such as the Suffolk County Water Authority and the Suffolk County Department of Health, stated that there should be no more further growth in this area. That's when we went from well water and we began the process to going to what some people still call city water these days, and we actually got all of the lines put in. That was going from the area of Devon Hills all the way down Cranberry Hole, all the way down Lazy Point, the entire section. We're not supposed to have any more further growth. So continuously this happens. They're going to tell you they're going to dump 100 cubic yards of sand over this. But why not 4? Like when Mr. Greco wanted to sprinkle his fairy dust over the top of these cubes to cover them, when it's supposed to be 1,000 cubic yards of sand the entire time. So how about the 60,000 cubic yards of sand they haven't dumped once over? And remember, they already wrote the DEC and they already told you we can't put sand back over here. But in the future, now we're going to put sand over a structure that doesn't exist? I'm extremely tired of this. And you know, I would really like my 5 years of memories back with my children. Since their birth, they've been denied their rights, as well as my oldest. And continuously, they give you the argument of convenience, not the facts that are here. And to say, I'm very impressed with what Mr. Samuelson just said, and Mr. Frank, as always, for his reports. This will always be a no and continue to be a no. Remember, this home was built in the wetlands, and any one of them, and anybody who has worked for them currently is now complicit in all the actions, which is also under town code. So thank you for your time, and I do hope that you go no on this. And remember, there's been multiple court actions on this already. There's already been letters of enforcement. So when Mr. Matthews wants to speak about 3 years ago, well, guess what, guys? Everything's been reactionary. We were already serving the town letters of enforcement and asked you to do something. Then they said, oh, we want to do this plan. When they came back to you after the court decision, then, oh, we want to get in contact with you in 2022. We got a plan now. Just remember, everything's reactionary for them. It's delay, 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 delay. And today is just 28 days later after your last meeting. So remember, it's 2,078 days since they did this. Please say no. Get our road open. And I hope that the law gets enforced in its full capacity. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bregman?
Good evening, Eric Bregman, 10 Gingerbread Lane in East Hampton. I represent 8 neighbors along Bayview. Not Mr. Karpinski, he has excellent counsel separately. Each of those neighbors have a deeded easement, as I'm sure you've heard before, to use the road to get to the beach and to have access all the way down to the...
Can you just bring the mic a little bit closer to you? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Is that better?
Yeah.
I'll try to speak up too. I have a little laryngitis. I apologize. And there are many reasons why an EIS should be done here. You've heard a bunch of them. I don't want to repeat it. I'm concerned and focused on the neighbors. and the neighbor's interest is in that road and what's going to happen. You've already heard a discrepancy in what the height of the famous PVC wall is going to be, either 5 feet or 7 feet or 8 feet. It's a visual issue, but that's not the main thing. You also heard from the applicant's engineer that the reason for that PVC wall is to protect the concrete wall from being affected by the wave action that, at least during storm periods, is going to be there. That wave action during storm periods will be scouring out, and they're concerned, the health department is concerned that it will scour out that concrete retaining wall for the septic system and impact the septic system, potential septic system. So I have a simple question. Why not the PVC wall? Isn't the same thing going to happen to that? Isn't that going to cause scouring, particularly in the road, which is where this wall is right next to? Isn't that going to create or potentially create the flood corridor and make that access road unusable? The cobble is not going to solve that, I don't think. I'm not an engineer, but my focus here is that your decision on the EIS is whether there's the potential for significant impacts. You don't decide that there are going to be some, so therefore we have to go look at it. You have to say, hey, we think there might be, or there is a potential for adverse impacts, significant adverse impacts, I think is the magic wording. That's your decision. They've already told you that there's going to be by the scouring. They already have the question of the flood corridor and the potential of the flood corridor and what's going to happen during storm issues and storm periods along that road. And the reports that you have, the engineer's report says essentially nothing about the report. It says the construction of this proposed revetment has been designed to taper off at the east and western lines in order to limit directing wave forces directly at the neighboring areas. Well, isn't the PVC wall going to do the same thing? Number one. In addition, a dynamic revetment consisting of cobble, gravel, and pebble that is similar to or coarser than the existing shoreline material is suggested in the Bayview Avenue right-of-way itself. I don't know what it means to put down cobble and gravel and call it a revetment. Doesn't sound like a revetment. It sounds like putting down gravel on your driveway, except a mix of cobble and other stuff. That's all they say. They're engineers. And I don't believe that Aram, and there was a lot of stuff in Aram's, if I misread or didn't read, I don't think he talks much about what's going to happen to the road, other than we're going to put cobble down and that'll make everything hunky-dory. The potential here, it seems to me, I used to know a lot more about CEQA and I used to know a lot more about environmental law, but the potential, and the engineering, the potential here is that what's going to happen is that there's going to be either a peninsula acting like a groin, and I don't know, because I don't know enough about what the currents are, and you don't either, and that's one of the reasons there should be an EIS, but I don't know what the effect of that's going to be on the recession, either to the east of this property or to the west, which is, of course, town wetlands property. That's why you need to have an EIS, I suggest to you. Excuse me. That's really my main point. There is nothing here to tell you what you need to know to make an ultimate decision. And that's, are there going to be impacts from this? Is it going to be a peninsula sitting out there like a groin? Is it in fact going to wind up during a storm as an island? with the house and the revetment separated from the property behind it because, again, of the PVC and the road and the flood corridor. I have a lot of things I'd like to say. It's always interesting to litigate with, which in some sense this is, with Brian Matthews. It's also interesting to litigate with Brian Frank, but that's a different issue. But there are a lot of things that he said. This is not a case of where you are just checking off boxes. This is what the town is asking you to do, what I'm asking you to do on the part of the neighbors, is to in fact take the hard look at what's going on here and answer these questions about what's going to happen to the recession and the erosion and even the accretion. And as I think Brian mentioned, as the alternatives, that's one of the key sections of any EIS. There are a bunch of people along the beach, particularly in Sacaponic, who pay a lot of money to keep their beach healthy by putting sand on it. That's what happened here a long time. That is a significant and available alternative. Will that have an adverse impact on the wetlands to the west because that sand will wind up in there? I'm not sure. And that's one of the things that has to be considered in analyzing that alternative. The last thing I want to say, particularly, I don't want to go step by step over Brian's statement, but I don't see anything in the non-existent Bukonevich report that says, as he said, that they conclude that there are no adverse impacts. I don't see him saying that. What he says is, in his view, a rock revetment would be better because it would last longer, not because it would work better than sand. He said sand will last a decade, maybe a little less. A rock revetment will last a lot longer. What does that mean? That means somebody's got to put more sand in there after a decade. Living on the water here is expensive. That's part of the deal. You want to live there, you have to live there, I suggest to you, respectfully of your neighborhood and of the wetlands. And the way you do that is by doing something other than putting a rock revetment there. Thank you.
Anybody else would like to address this application? Come forward.
Hi there, Steve Odesser, 70 Bayview.
You swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do. Just a quick comment. The applicant's counsel has made really clear that this evaluation has been going on for too long. The planning board has made it crystal clear that the proposed rock wall, et cetera, is inconsistent with code. Please, let's move on so we can get our beach back. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Dean Adele, 18 Bayview.
You swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. I guess I would just like to ask the question, if a rock revetment is put in place at the end of the block, what's then to say that the entire strip, including Cranberry Hole Road, all the way out to Laos, then across the channel, all the way down Girard, why don't they get them? By the time my kids are 45, if this water moves at 2 feet a year, water will be back, 80, 90s, whatever it's going to be, depending, give or take. All those homes are going to need it. So are we supposed to say that the shoreline is going to be covered in rocks and PVC? Doesn't really feel sort of in harmony with what we're supposed to be doing here. And I'd also like beach access back for my family. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Come on up. Yeah, he announced it in the beginning. I know.
Good evening, everybody. Rusty Uson, 58 Bayview Avenue.
Rusty, do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes. I just wanted the board to become aware of the fact that there is a existing harm being done to the community, to the residents. There's a continuing, I think, conversion of property, which was an access to the beach that we all enjoyed. And ever since that rock wall came up, it's been taken away. And to think that this board would engage in a decision that permanently took it away is unconscionable. Beach access is important to this town, and it really is just unfathomable that it's been taken away by one or two people. Whole families are different now in terms of how we view where we live, and that is wrong. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Anybody else? Come up.
Chris Seeger, 55 Bayview.
Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. I'd just like to reaffirm, I have a 6-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a Labrador. And not only has the use of the beach been taken away, but I would like to walk down and see the sunset, have a cup of coffee, walk down in the morning with my dog. I take my kids who are young and my dog down there, and the current geocube structures actually not only prohibit us from going on the beach, but they're also dangerous. My dog got loose one day, he jumped down, I can't get him back, right? The geocubes are falling apart, they're not maintained. They're actually hazardous to my children. That's a public road, as far as I know. It's a hazard as it stands currently, and there needs to be something done about it.
Thank you.
Hi, Matthew Amorati, 89 Bayview.
Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
I think the biggest question is, as you see now the block has shown up here, can I ask the board, how do we get access back to the beach? How do we do that? It's been years, there's been property loss, a value here. How do we do that as a block that's now showing up to these meetings, spending countless hours trying to do that? I know it's not I know you guys don't make it up, but I understand that, and we've hired counsel to help us in that. But I think that's the biggest struggle here, is how is this done? How is someone permitted to do this? And then have a whole block show up and say, hey, we'd like our beach access back. So can I ask that question? What is the best method to do that?
Thank you. Can't answer that right now.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Anybody else? Matt, is anybody on the line?
You have 0 callers. Thank you.
Okay. Matt, you want to come up?
I think Aaron was then I was.
All right, you make it brief, guys.
That's why I'm going first. I'm just going to talk about 3 things. Number one, let's talk about sand. Is it good or is it bad? Well, if you read, the TAM, it's good because beach restoration is a solution here, and you can do it, and it's going to solve the problem. But it's bad because it's going to wash into the wetland. Now, sand is good. It's just not going to work here. I've built, I don't know how many beaches in the last 40 years. It's not going to work here. The physics don't allow it to occur. You cannot, on a parcel-by-parcel basis, build and maintain a beach. You have to have 1,000 feet or more on the Peconics or in the Peak to have a sustainable beach. You don't have that. Can't be done. Why 100 yards of sand? Because when you're looking to ameliorate the impacts of a rock revetment structure, the first thing you do is the design work. Slope it, make it porous, taper the ends. The second thing you do is you say, how much land would be eroded every year if the revetment wasn't in place? What is the beach-compatible sand component of what's being eroded? You put that material there. Is it going to stay covered? No. It's designed to be transported away because it's adding the material into the literal system that would otherwise have been available if not for the structure. That's part of the mitigation. Is it going to end up in the wetland? Yeah, a lot of it is. Is that bad? No, I totally disagree with Brian. Wetlands are made up of all different types of stuff. The stuff he described and the stuff that Dr. Wisher described. There is no one size fits all. And the question is, how do they get beach access back? Well, we've been trying, I think, 3 separate times to revise the current design of the geocubes to get access back for these residents who deserve it. We've been denied every time. Okay? The other part is the plan we have before you, where we have a pebbly, cobbly beach in the access way, will provide them with the access that is going to be appropriate to that area, where they can safely walk, they can have their cup of coffee, and even take a Labrador. That's how you get beach access back. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you for allowing me this last moment here, and I think it's important to touch upon that last point that Aaron said. The applicant wants nothing more than to get these geocubes gone and give everybody back the beach access. No, there's no desire here, intention or desire, to try to cut off beach access. Multiple applications have been filed with this board and the building department to open up the geocubes, to open up the roadway. They've been completely unacted upon. So that's an accurate statement. So
The board for that, though.
well, actually, it is.
Guys, order.
The building permit.
Excuse me, order,
I'll address the board. You can't do it because if you take out the geocubes, then the home and the property is exposed, and then what? I asked this last time, would you expose your property to the wave action, the severe erosion here that the town, this board and the planning department has determined time and time again is the most severely impact erosion area in the town? I suspect that no one would voluntarily do that. So, just want to touch upon a couple things that the town's planning staff said. And I agree with the statement that Brian made, that accuracy and thoroughness are important. So why don't we do that? First thing I want to address is planning director's statement. A blanket statement, and sometimes playing amateur lawyer is not the best way to go. Focus on the code. What they want to do here is prohibited, and use his words, full stop. I'm certain that the town's planning director didn't mean to advise this board that the variance standards embedded in the New York State town law and the village code for decades and decades and decades were somehow unavailable to the applicant. I'm sure that was just an oversight. With respect to some of the other statements that were made to why a DEIS should be done here because it was done on all these other applications. Well, let's be accurate and thorough there. It is incorrect to say that there are no other, that I believe Brian Frank said, no other revetments were reviewed under the NRSP standards. Well, that's not accurate. 157 Mulford was reviewed under those standards. It's inaccurate to say no other revetments exist in this area. There was a revetment that was approved with no zoning board approval, mind you, just by the planning department and the town's engineer for the Mulford Lane property owners. No review whatsoever. That revetment is in. And then the comparisons were tried to be made between 153 Mulford, 114 Bayview Avenue, and the Curtis property, which is 395 Cranberry Hill, I think. None of those properties and none of those applications are remotely analogous to this application. 153 Mulford was denied. Myself and Aaron were involved in that from day one until the end. The record is very clear on that, and Mr. Chairman, you were on the board as well. And I believe, Mr. Berger, you might have been on the board as well. The controlling factor there about why that revetment was denied was because the applicant at that time was not proposing to relocate the house, and that was ultimately the deciding factor. The state otherwise is simply disingenuous. With respect to the Curtis and Ruru properties where the DEISs were done, they should be treated the same. We're not the same. Those were geocube wall revetments. This application is proposing to remove those geocubes, apples and oranges. You cannot say that those are the same. Vertical versus horizontal, they are not the same, as our engineers and everybody agrees. So it's not the same process that's being followed, no matter how many times that statement gets made. And so, you know, I know we've been here a while, and I don't really want to go on too much longer, but the record's been made here, and it's pretty compelling. It's pretty compelling that this revetment is necessary, that something needs to be done here. I think we can all agree on that. It's compelling that what needs to be done here and what the experts agree on, including the idea of diminishing Dr. Buchanewicz's report is something I certainly don't understand. I get wanting to do it, but it's not really supportable. To advance the idea, well, he never got formally retained, as though that's a good fact, I can assure you it's not and would not be looked at as a good fact. That a report got issued that we obviously disagreed with, didn't fit this preconceived narrative. We don't need your help here, doctor. We'll handle this on our own. That fact's not going to be looked at good by a court ever. So let's conclude with what our experts concluded, and that this board's own expert concluded, that the proposed revetment here is the best alternative to protect the property. Those are the expert findings. Everything else is speculation, predetermined. That's it. It's not supportable. It's not supportable for a POSDEC. It's not supportable for a DIS. It's not supportable to deny this application. So again, go back and look at the record here. Look at how this application's been handled. Look at the expert reports that have been submitted. The only way to go forward here is, again, to work collaboratively. We think a neg deck should be adopted, certainly, but if the board is concerned about impacts, a condition neg deck is an opportunity and it's the only appropriate way to go. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I think we're going, what's our motion now? Do we close the hearing? No, we can't close the hearing. This is an ongoing thing. All right, so I think I'm going to direct the board to be ready. We're going to move things along. I think we're going to put this on our work session to discuss. Next Tuesday is our work session. We'll put that on the agenda to talk about that. With that, I think we're going to end the evening. Thank you for all your input, and thank you.
Can't we close the hearing?
It's a secret. It's going to go on.
I have to go get some water. I'll be sure.
Close it on purpose?
From the same coffee.
I don't think it is.
I know, it's dry heat in here.
Don't get
Those
to
are the
do
ones
this
that
much.
always get us in trouble.
I'm still waiting for it.
Practice. Jameson will be right back.
Sorry, I don't know. It's like something's stuck in my throat.
There's the air in here.
It's so, it's quite warm in here. Plus, there is air conditioning. There is air conditioning.
Your guess is as good as mine. If I hadn't
So, here. All right, next.
Oh, wait till the chair tells us. I brought my notes. Are we discussing each other, or are we just?
We're going to talk about it again. Jameson sent an email to all of us.
Right.
She'll start talking first.
To what extent?
She'll explain first, I think.
Did we need a motion to continue?
The jacket.
Did we do a motion or anything?
I think that's the attorney that's
No.
here.
Oh, okay.
Or we just leave the hearing
Or
open?
attorney from
It's
from
going to
earlier.
be open for a long time.
Okay.
Her jacket.
Oh, that jacket. I think it's that one. Beth. Oh.
Okay.
Beth Baldwin.
All right, now, thank you. We're going to enter the work session. We have some other decisions to make this evening. First, we're going to discuss Lance Sutter at 57 Harborview Lane at Springs, Suffolk Tax Map number 300-57-4-10, and it's a discussion and vote pursuant to court order. I'm going to ask our counsel to tee us up on this.
Hi, everyone. So I took some notes here to give the board a little bit of a procedural history. There was a public hearing on the subject application on October 24th, 2023, and the board adopted a determination on December 19th, 2023, in which this board denied it. It was a 2-2 vote. The purpose of the application was to demolish an existing residence and construct 2,160 square foot two-story residence with 600 square feet of decking and covered porch and a new sanitary system on a parcel of land containing tidal wetlands and coastal bluffs. So there was an NRSP required, and variances from the minimum wetland setbacks, coastal setbacks, harbor protection overlay district. I can read that all if the board wants, or we can set that aside for now. After the application was denied, counsel for the applicant filed a verified petition pursuant to Article 78. That was filed on January 18th, 2024. By stipulation, the town of East Hampton had a deadline to file the answer until March 20th, 2024. However, prior to us answering the petition on February 21st, the town received notice of an order of Judge Hensley that was dated February 20th. It's very short, so I will read it for the board. You've all seen this. It's for the record also. Let's see. I'll just say the index number is 601-487-2024. Upon the following papers read by petitioner's application pursuant to Article 78, NYSCEF documents 1 through 15, it is hereby ordered petitioner's application is granted without opposition, and the Zoning Board of Appeals decision dated December 19, 2023 is annulled and reversed, and the matter is remitted to the ZBA for a decision and vote by the full board. That's signed Honorable Paul Hensley, dated February 20th, 2024. So we have added this to tonight's agenda, as the board has to, in compliance with this order, make a decision and a vote by the full board tonight, if they're prepared to. At least we should be discussing it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
About the terminology. So if he annulled our decision, why are we voting?
That's an excellent question.
I believe he remanded it back to the board for a decision.
Yes, I'll read. I can read it again.
You don't have to read it again, because I heard it, but I'm
Yes.
just saying, you said he annulled the decision and then remanded it back to us for decision. So I guess he stayed the decision, isn't that what he did?
He could have just ordered the board to approve it.
No. Okay.
He didn't do that, but he does use the language annulled and reversed, and then remits it to the zoning board for a decision and vote by the full board. I haven't been the attorney for the board for very long, so I can't say I've seen this before. So.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. So I think we'll go through the same protocol as we always do. Beth, our vice chair, this
You
was
want me to
in
start?
here. Would you please start?
Okay. Let's see. Areas like this property are clearly vulnerable to erosion and future storms. And we're clearly more learned than we were in the past, that overdevelopment should not exist in some areas of shoreline where flooding in low-lying areas can threaten lives and damage property. Historically, the neighborhood has had flooding problems, making them vulnerable properties. This property lies in an X-flood zone and an AE flood zone with an elevation of 7 feet, which fronts on 3 Mile Harbor. This area is problematic with wells and septics as well. The current house is 1,600 square feet, and they want to demolish it and construct a 2,160 square foot two-story residence with 461 square feet of terrace and covered porch. The property already has a 180 linear foot floating dock on it as well. Due to the constraints on the property, the setbacks for the residence and septic system require substantial variances greater than 50% from the town's minimum wetland setbacks for the construction of these structures. The elephant in the room is truly the coverage increase associated with this application. The board needs to evaluate the coverage increase when the magnitude of the variances are dimensionally large, especially in an area of smaller properties. Would this set a precedent along 3 Mile Harbor properties and other similar lot sizes in the neighborhood with the same constraints? FEMA can be met without increasing the size of one's house. This property is severely constrained because of the size of its size, 8,427 square feet, and its close proximity to the shoreline. The property contains less than half the required lot area of the property in a B residential zoning district, and even lacks a building envelope that could conform to the minimum 100-foot wetland setback for structures. Wetlands variances are substantial, and the magnitude of the variances are also very large, and we have to address whether this approval will set a precedent, especially while also asking for a natural resource special permit relief, whose very standards are set up solely to protect the environment and the natural features, and in this case, 3 Mile Harbor. There is also a short bluff on this property. The coverage increase is going right up to the maximum with this project, and we need to evaluate that closely when a project is asking for substantial variances and a natural resource special permit. This property is in the Harbor Protection Overlay District, and the purpose of a Harbor Protection Overlay District is to maintain or improve surface water quality in East Hampton's major harbors, creeks, and ponds. This district will help prevent the entry of stormwater runoff into the town's waters. These waters are among the town's most prized features. This property is very steep, and while I did my field inspection, there was standing water on the site. This entire area is problematic with wells and septics, and one of the neighbors to protect here is 3 Mile Harbor. This property is also in the Coastal Erosion Overlay District, whose purpose is the protection of the town's natural shoreline of coastal resources. This overlay district requires protection because of their important flooding and erosion prevention functions, their scenic qualities, their value for public recreation and water access, and their value as wildlife habitat. 3 Mile Harbor is a component of the Peconic Estuary Critical Environment Area and is a New York State significant coastal fish and wildlife habitat. The waterfront properties and surface waters of 3 Mile Harbor are part of the 3 Mile Harbor Scenic Area of State Significance. This is actually why the Planning Department always tries to maximize wetland and bluff crest setbacks. The offering of the mitigation in this application is admirable, but does not exempt the application or project from meeting the standards for a variance and a natural resource special permit on such a constrained and small lot. After another tremendous amount of thought and research going into the standards set forth in 255-420 NRSP and 255-430 minimum wetland setbacks. I feel this project just does not meet the threshold or standards for all the reasons already stated. I am denying this application in its entirety.
Thank you. Ed? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For me, I start with a couple of statements that were made the night of the hearing. Any building that would be possibly put on this property would require a variance based on the fact that it's such a constrained property. There's no place on the property that you could build without one. The new structure, if approved, would eliminate an existing pyramid violation. That's something that was a positive and net positive for it to make. There's also the new IA system that's going in, required or not, is an improvement on such a constrained lot. All the reasons that were mentioned by the vice chair, I think, are valid. I think that the fact that we have this lot that is right on the waterfront, and that we have to be very careful of what decisions we make on a property like this. I think all of those other controls that have been put in place to protect a property like this should be respected. However, I think that in this particular case, and I was one of the votes for it before, and I'm going to stay that way, I think that there's been significant effort made here, or in the efforts that are being made, there'll be an improvement and not a degradation on the environment. I think the IA system, the buffer that's going to be added, additional vegetation between the development and the waterfront. There's also an effort to remove an existing deck that they claimed how much they cared for, but willing to take it out. I think there was an effort to agree to all of the mitigation that was suggested. We'll accept all, I wrote here, accept all proposed mitigation that was said that night by the representative. There was a discussion of whether or not the septic system would have an effect on wells in the area and whether there was town water. It was stated at the night of the hearing that there was not a well nearby that would be affected in a legal way by the septic system, the sanitary system. Let me see what other. I think that the idea that there's going to be that we've increased GFA is a factor for sure, and you are going from 1,600 to 2,160 square feet. But I thought that the overall lot coverage is only going up by 100 square feet because of the removal of some hardened walkways and things like that. A new house will be more energy compliant, which will be a benefit in terms of that kind of conservation in that area. The house that existed was a 3-bedroom and a series of add-ons that make that house untenable for them to try to repair in its condition. It's sat much closer to a property line. The new location of the house would be further away. I thought that by eliminating the pyramid violation, that was a positive in terms of the construction. But I think on here, beyond the construction, it was an environmental decision to make. As the vice chair said, she had a very strong feeling in that direction. My feeling was when I looked at the net here, the IA system, the additional buffer, a more efficient house. I thought that, I made a note the night of the hearing, I thought that a good effort to improve their residents and consider the environment at the same time had been made by the applicant. And while I'll agree that this was a difficult one for us to consider with all the factors, I'm going to stay with my decision of that night, and I want to approve this application in its entirety.
Thank you. Dean?
Okay. Thank you. So a little prologue. I was not a member of the board at the time the application was heard and decided in the fourth quarter of 2023. So first I want to attest that I have reviewed very closely the videos of the public hearing and the public hearing, post-hearing decision discussion, as well as I've closely reviewed all the associated documents in the public hearing file. So I am prepared to engage in this review and discussion. I'm going to take some time here to go through my analysis in depth and point by point relative to the code standards, because this is an unusual circumstance as the court has sent this back to the board for a full 5-person deliberation and decision, and I am that fifth person, so I want to be as complete and definitive as possible to this record. So first, I just want to confirm the basic elements I am relying on in my assessment, the survey of October 16th, 2022, and also the 2011 survey, including the existing conditions memo. As already mentioned, I am considering that this property is located in a B residence zone, as well as HPOD, coastal erosion overlay, and it abuts the waters of 3 Mile Harbor, one of the most important water bodies in the town for a multitude of reasons. And we have just recently heard the expert Dr. Gobler report out to the trustees last week of the overall significantly increasing risk to water bodies such as this, from rapidly increasing water temperatures, frequency and intensity of harmful algal blooms, and increased runoff from unprecedented precipitation events that are occurring more frequently. In terms of the lot size, I do note that the stated lot size at 8,427 square feet is already 58% under pre-existing, under size substandard to residence zone minimums, but the key lot size metric, I believe, is 6,910 square feet, which excludes the area over the bluff crest, and that means this is 65% substandard as well. The house dates back, I believe, to the late 1920s, early 1930s. It's been added to over time. The entire cottage, as I understand it, based on the property card and other information, was renovated from the ground up only 10 years ago, just before it was purchased by the applicant. The current cottage proposed to be demolished is 1,600 square feet with 3 bedrooms and a first floor GFA of 1,162. I believe the overall height of the current structure is very restrained, though I did not see the current height in the public file. The GFA for the proposed structure, 2,160 square feet. That's a substantial increase of 560 square feet and 35%, and that brings this house to, I believe, just 5.7 below the maximum GFA that would be available on any lot. The building coverage has been discussed, increases to 16.8%, up to the max, from 16.8% up to the max of 20% of the lot area. Coverages are always expressed in our code as percentages. They really are always considered as relative to lot size. So I do not agree with the assessment that, quote, it's just only another 221 square feet. Most importantly, of course, are the variances. The new house will require variances of 58%, 58.5%, and 50% respectively from the wetlands and the bluff crest. And with respect to the new decking, that structure will require variances of 74.7% and 85.4% respectively in terms of magnitude from the wetlands and the bluff crests. And finally, just to wrap up these sort of basic things that impact all my assessment and decision-making relative to the code, I'm noting that the 102.8 foot variance required for the new septic, it is most likely the minimum variance necessary for that, and is probably in the best position, so I'm not really addressing it as a variable in my decision-making here. So turning from these foundational stats, I want to talk to the variances and the natural resources special permit standards and safeguards that this board needs to address to make our determination. I will start with the variances to go directly to the standards as set forth in 255-850D, which lays out what the board must determine in order to grant any area variance, including these particular natural resources related setback variances. My full review and consideration of this application is as follows. So 255-850D1, the Board of Appeals shall not grant any variance unless it finds fully set forth in its determination that, and I'm going to skip to B, that the area variance to be granted is the minimum variance necessary and adequate to alleviate the difficulty causing the applicant to request an area variance, while at the same time preserving and protecting the character of the neighborhood and the health, safety, welfare of the town. This is my assessment relative to this code. According to 255-850D2, quote, "The applicant shall have the burden of showing that the benefit accruing to him from grant of the requested variance outweighs any harm which will be caused to the neighborhood or the town, and that the variance requested is the minimum variance needed to alleviate his difficulty while safeguarding the character of the neighborhood and town." Over the course of this application and public hearing process, the applicant, A, did not articulate a compelling benefit to him related to demolishing the existing and building this enlarged structure. B, the applicant did not establish what actual difficulty or real need he is facing that requires the demolition of the existing house and the building of the new structure, 35% bigger in terms of GFA and expanding coverage by 19% to the max, let on a lot, any lot, let alone one with this environmental fragility and constraint. There was only a fleeting reference to a desire for improved insulation, but nothing was established that couldn't be achieved in the existing structure or a new structure of the same or comparable size. So with respect to 255-850D2C, the applicant never met the burden, quote unquote, hurdle of showing that the variances requested are the minimum necessary. With respect to 255-850D3, A, will the grant of the variance cause an undesirable change to the character of the neighborhood or create detriment to nearby properties? This applicant has attempted to make the case that because the current house, which is pre-existing non-conforming to both setback and pyramid allowances, lot setback and pyramid allowances relative to the northern property line, is being demolished, thereby extinguishing those two nonconformities, and that the new house will not require a pyramid variance or a lot line setback variance. And they're basically saying that in and of itself is enough to say that, quote, character of the neighborhood will be improved and there will be no undesirable change to the character or detriment to surrounding properties. But I need to analyze that assertion across a few points. First, it was unclear and was never resolved during the public hearing and public record that the house is eligible for reduced northern and even southern lot line setbacks per the 2/10 rule. The TAM, and again at the public hearing, the applicant's agent was instructed to and agreed to seek interpretation of the chief building inspector on the matter. As I recall, the board voted to leave the record open post the hearing for receipt of that letter. However, as far as I see in the public record, that interpretation from the chief building inspector was never received, and so we cannot with certainty conclude that the application meets the zoning and that additional area variances are not required. Second, in our zoning code in the East Hampton Town Comprehensive Plan, on which the purposes of zoning as well as the sections of 255 are based, quote, character relates to a constellation of attributes, including rural, scenic, historic, natural, aesthetic elements. It is not based simply on if a pre-existing nonconformity to a lot line or pyramid limit is extinguished. Based on character as defined and described in the town of East Hampton, the granting of these variances to enable this increase in mass and scale while also requiring 4 such substantial wetland and bluff crest variances, I believe this application will create an undesirable change to character as follows. First, although it is not designated, this house in its current position right on the public access to that area of the beach is an anchor to the long existing character of this neighborhood. Its demolition will be a loss and a detriment to the character of this unique neighborhood. Secondly, enhancing the important contribution this existing house makes to the scenic character of the neighborhood and the fact it is fully visible in that public space. I note that the setback of the new house relative to the southern boundary on Harbor View, which is the area that's most visible, is being reduced to just 13.2 feet compared with the current side setback of 26 feet or more. Combining that with a significant increase of GFA coverage and height of the house relative to a lot that is 65% substandard to B residence minimum, the undesirable change relative to character will be material. And this is something that can really only be adequately understood by being physically present at the site. 255-850-D3B, can the benefit be sought in a way that's achieved by some method other than an area variance? Here I answer no. The sizing constraints of the physical parcel most likely preclude finding a building envelope to build a new house without any variances. With respect to 255-850-D3C, whether the requested variances are substantial, I already answered that when I set up my facts. With respect to coastal and minimum wetland setbacks, they are definitely in a magnitude, all four of these variances, that is clearly in a range that this board consistently assesses as substantial. I note that in the hearing, the applicant made a case that somehow looking at wetland variances and bluff crust variances is somehow double counting due to a quirk in the East Hampton Natural Resources Protection Code. I believe that argument is not valid and should be set aside in our consideration of whether to grant variance. Our code makes abundantly clear that bluffs as well as wetlands are two distinct and equally important elements in overall coastal systems, and they each serve separate but equally important functions that are both essential to protecting, among other things, surface waters, flood protection, and wildlife habitat. To set one or the other type of variance aside is not important, or double counting would be arbitrary. 255-850-D3D, will the grant of the variance have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood and the affected area of the town? To reiterate, as I apply this code, the fragility sensitivity of this parcel, it sits right on 3 Mile Harbor shoreline with a very steep topography that slopes steeply to the wetlands and surface waters. As we've said, it's highly sensitive. It's in HPOD, coastal erosion overlay. So increasing development and substantially not meeting required wetland and bluff crest setbacks can be considered on its face as creating adverse effect on physical and environmental conditions, especially as expanding a house size and coverage towards their maximums. As a board, I believe we must also consider not only the potential impact of this particular increased development on this lot on its own, but we also do need to take into account potential or likely cumulative adverse impact, as granting these types of substantial natural resources variance here will set a precedent across this sensitive area. In terms of the environmental benefits that are proposed to be created by the application, first, the new IA septic system obviously provides meaningful nitrogen reduction compared to the old existing septic system. However, the stated policy of upgrading a septic system is that it's supposed to reduce the impact of effluent from current improvement on the properties and not to enable greater or increased development. In addition, the IA system in this application or any redevelopment, even a smaller house, is not mitigation, it is required. The applicant per the survey has made the case that they're voluntarily offering 3 areas of revegetation. I believe only 2 of those are valid. The 1,284 square feet in the on the Outlook, adjacent to the Outlook Avenue and the 830 square feet of revegetation just landward of the bluff crest. There is an assertion that there's another 1,089 square feet of re-veg in the area between the bluff crest and the wetlands. However, this appears to overstate the plan, given that the particular area is already fully and properly vegetated between the bluff down to the shore. And then the TAM, per the TAM, at its closest point, the existing I'm going to skip this one. Finally, I believe that a case can be made that an environmental benefit will be achieved by their plan to raise the first floor elevation of the new house to become FEMA compliant. However, I was confused by that because the entirety of the area upland from the bluff crest, where the house is and will be, is in an X flood zone as opposed to an AE or VE. So it's not clear if a meaningful environmental benefit is to be claimed here by raising it, especially as the new house will sit on top of a substantial concrete foundation. And then lastly, for the variance, 255-850-D3E, is the difficulty causing the applicant to request an area variance self-created? The answer to that is yes. The request for substantial variances is entirely self-created. As I noted before, there was no difficulty or even need rationale established, and the order of magnitude of the variances could be smaller if a smaller house, smaller footprint relative to what is proposed could have meaningfully improved this application. Okay, I'm going to wrap up. I'm sorry. I'm just doing this because I am new to this application, and it's, as I said, a very specific and unusual situation. So now I just want to shift from the variance standards to my assessment of how this application compares with the standards and safeguards of the NRSP per 255-551 that the code requires for every natural resource special permit issued. In this case, I focus on sections C and D, and I'll address D first. Preservation of natural resources. I won't reread the whole thing, but all structures and uses shall be located so that no natural resource feature or system designated in 255-412 will be diminished, et cetera, or placed in peril. With respect to standard 1, underneath that, are alternative reasonable uses of the property determined not to exist? As I apply the code here, alternative reasonable uses of the property do exist. People have inhabited this 1,600 square foot or less house on this property for nearly 100 years. The applicant knowingly purchased and occupied this sized house for a decade, so clearly the existing house itself, or one of a comparable size, is a reasonable use. And as I discussed earlier, the applicant has not, on the record, provided information that establishes why a new house with a smaller coverage and requiring more moderate variances than what is proposed could not be reasonable use. And 2, are alternative designs entailing smaller buildings or structures, setbacks, reconfigurations deemed to be infeasible. Again, alternative designs compatible with this standard that would lessen coverage of the lot and reduce magnitude and number of wetland and bluff crest setbacks are indeed feasible, and the application in no way established a case to us on the contrary. Finally, compatibility with the purposes of this chapter to 255-111 and 255-410 are also required to meet NRSP standards. Based on everything I've said already, as I apply the code, it is my assessment that this application, as proposed, is not fully compatible with 255-111B, protection of neighborhoods, E, preservation, and L, aesthetic attributes, nor do I find it fully compatible with 255-410 A, B, and E, nor do I find it fully compatible with 255-540K, environmental protection. And so taking all of this analysis, I am voting to deny this application.
Thank you. Terry?
I have nothing to say.
Now you have to get yourself on the record.
Yes,
Terry.
I know. Okay, I had to go through this again because I no longer had my paperwork, but in all of, at first glance, when you look at this, taking away the pyramid, moving the house slightly south, all sounds good. They're eliminating some variances. However, as you do go into this and look at it in more depth, the variances are substantial. The 58.1 for the residents, 71, well, the terrace, that might have been modified a little bit. The 102.8 for the IA system, and the bluff crest variances also are substantial, where the 50-foot should be required. In the testimony and in the TAM, and Brian Frank's testimony, a lot of the revegetation, they offered additional revegetation. There was significant revegetation that was offered, according to the applicant. They reduced the driveway size. But as Brian said at the hearing, the proposed revegetation, while it sounds good between the bluff crest and the wetland, the buffer is still somewhere from 12 to 20 feet, and he felt that the additional revegetation to the south is increasing that buffer in that area to 25 feet, but the town code's minimum setback is typically like 50 feet. So he felt that variance, that revegetation was not really adequate to protect the harbor and the area between the house and the bluff crest and wetlands. There was discussion about the coverage increase is the big thing. I feel that this application does not meet the variance standards. I feel the variances are huge, and as brought out, I think they impact the character of the neighborhood here. It was also stated all the homes along Outlook Avenue, which is this on the corner of Outlook and Harbor View, are all substandard lots, and this one is extremely substandard. It's less than half the required amount for this particular zone. It's 8,400 total lot size, but it is impossible, as was stated, impossible to have an all-conforming location here on this property. But I think this will potentially impact other properties all along Outlook Avenue where there are no properties that have any better conditions than this one. They're all substandard, they're all small, and any activity here could, as far as be in violation of 255-111, orderly growth, neighborhoods protection, and there was also the discussion from the Outlook Avenue side for the location of the setback, which was going to be addressed with an appeal, I guess, or a question to the building inspector. And the ultimate, I'm denying this application in its entirety, and probably the ultimate thing is the same thing that I run into time after time on these applications. As stated, the IA systems are not supposed to accommodate, they may be required, but they weren't. The town board didn't implement this to increase the sizes of the houses and increase the intensity of use in houses. And this application, with all the substandard sizes and variances required and negatives on it, including NRSP, in addition to regular dimensional standards, they're bringing this lot size from 1161, the lot coverage, up to 1382, a difference of 221 square feet, which does not sound a lot necessarily, but when you compare it to the size of the lot and the size of the existing lot coverage, it is a large amount. And that, for the increase in the GFA and that lot coverage, I have to deny this application in its entirety.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to maintain my positive, my approval of this application. First, I'm going to start with I find it difficult to say, anybody to say that revegetation in HPOD is invalid. I think that it's a very character of HPOD and definition of HPOD is to increase vegetation, and to say that there's vegetation that is invalid is, and that doesn't jive with what I believe that to be. I look at this as, what is this an improvement to the environment? I agree with the sensitivity of the area. I agree with the character of the neighborhood. I agree with the thing. But what I'm looking at is an increase in the environmental conditions. We can argue that the increase in square footage is an impact. I think that the impact in the increase of square footage is minimized by the fact that we are removing hardened walkways. The addition will be treated with gutters and leaders that take the runoff into the ground. The hardened walkways that are there that are being taken away, water runs directly into 3 Mile Harbor. And I find that the impact on that is greater environmentally. I find that the increase in the red vegetation, the applicant did come back to us with removing the existing deck that goes to the bluff crest and increasing the shed. What I'd like to do is kind of reiterate the existing nonconformities, because I think that's the elephant in the room. I think the existing nonconformities, if you look at the northern lot line, the residence, patio, and shed all are nonconforming to the northern lot line. As if you look at the front yard, the shed and the slate patio are nonconforming to the front yard. As you look at the pyramid, you have the house on the north line, you have the shed on the north line, and you have the shed on the east line that are not conforming to pyramid. If you look at the wetlands, you have the deck, you have the house, you have the shed, the existing septic, and the slate patios and walkways that are non-conforming in its existing condition. You have the clearing within 50 feet of the wetlands, which is non-conforming. And as far as the bluff crest, you have the deck, the house, the shed, the slate patios, and the existing septic that are all non-conforming to this application, to the existing part of this house. And I think most of these are either improved or eliminated. You have the house being moved landward. So I see a net positive environmentally to 3 Mile Harbor, as opposed to, and I think that outweighs the 220 so square feet that is being added to this. And so with that, I think it does meet the NRSP standards, and I think that, again, this lot is non-conforming lot. You cannot build on this house without realizing setback variances to the bluff crest and the wetlands. So I maintain my approval of this application.
Mr. Chair, can I just address the first thing that you said? I don't...
To address it. I don't want to be... And that's, you made a statement.
But I want to make sure that the statement I made was clearly interpreted.
I get it. You said the vegetation to the front of the house.
Well, may I, please? The first two components of revegetation at the outlook side and landward of the bluff crest that add up to I think it's 2,050 square feet of revegetation is important. The only point I was making is that I don't think the overall revegetation was as great as was suggested on the survey, because they're saying they're revegetating over 1,000 square feet of area that is already properly natively vegetated. So that's all. That is the part that I thought was
noted. I was reacting to your word invalid. So okay. Thank you. I think that's it. Council, we good?
Don, were we good?
Yeah. I think just to be sure, I think you should make a motion.
Oh, because of this person. to,
What do we have to do?
So you have three no's. So I think the board should make a motion that you're denying the application.
Generally, we don't.
I'm not hearing you. Make a motion.
Motion that would deny it.
Okay.
Generally, you don't, because we usually would be drafting a new
Right.
determination.
But
I don't
Vice
think we are
Chair,
here.
want to make that motion?
Sure. All right, let me get to. In the matter of the application of Lance Sutter, 57 Harborview Lane in Springs, Suffolk County Tax Map Number 300-57-4-10. I make a motion that pursuant to the discussion and vote that we had tonight pursuant to court order, the board rendered a decision of 3-2 to deny the application.
I'll second that.
I concur.
Concur.
I concur. Thank you. Okay, next.
Can you?
I'm recused from 60 Osprey.
Keep it open.
Yeah.
That's all right.
So we have
that one on my.
We have Anna Kenger at 60 Osprey Road, Amagansett, Suffolk Tax Map Number 300-131-7-3, is to request to keep the record open until April 16th. Do we have a motion?
Well, I'll do it.
You want to make, okay.
Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, in the matter of Anna Kenger at 60 Osprey Road, Amagansett, Suffolk County Tax Map 300-131-7-3, make a motion to keep the record open until April 16th.
I'll second it.
I concur.
I concur.
Recused.
Thank you. Next, we have the draft minutes of March 26, 2024.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion for the East Hampton Town Zoning Board of Appeals, to approve the minutes for March 26, 2024.
Second.
I concur.
I concur, thank you. We move on to resolutions. We have the Surf Lodge, 183 Edgemere Street, Montauk, Suffolk Tax Map Number 300-27-3-14. This is a motion to approve on it.
Yeah.
Unanimous, right?
I was not able to I was not home a lot today. I didn't get to review this one, but it was pretty simple. It was a unanimous approval of an awning over a deck at the Surf Lodge. It was pretty simple, but I did not specifically get to read this because I didn't have it. But I trust that everyone else did, and it looks okay to everyone. So, in the matter of Surf Lodge, Suffolk County Tax Map 300-27-03-14, I make a motion to approve the resolution as written.
I'll second it.
I concur.
I concur.
Thank you. We're not going to do Bronzo tonight?
Where were you?
We next have Jason Miller at 57 Seaside Avenue, Montauk, Suffolk Tax Map Number 300-32-4-25.
Okay, can I ask a question on this one, counsel? When we made the decision, it was a unanimous decision, as you know, and this is the application on Seaside Avenue with the bridge. There was an extensive construction protocol submitted and extensive vegetation and scenic easement. At the night we made the decision, there was a drawing that we clarified on the screen that Tyler did. And I don't know, do we need to note that in the conditions of approval here under the scenic easement? I thought we reviewed it that night for clarification.
We talked about that. I talked about that with Teresa earlier. It does state that it goes on the review. So I'm not sure if that's proper, or do we need to reference, she has a point. Will that drawing get lost in the review process?
So I thought Tyler was going to actually print it out.
I don't know that answer.
Yeah, I know.
There was discussion about it.
There was a discussion, yeah, because the survey was very busy, so we weren't clear of the exact line of that additional part that they added after the hearing. or at the hearing just before.
The additional vegetation.
The additional buffer area and scenic easement.
We had
Yeah.
said it was going to be the contour line 22, I think.
Is that what it was? Oh, okay.
We
So,
had said that at the hearing, that I had either repeated what it was already said by Tyler, but he did clarify that that's what he was suggesting.
it was along the 22-foot contour line.
Right.
So that brought it up with that additional, I think it was, I forget how many hundred
Close to
square
50
feet.
feet.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, so should we add that verbiage to it then?
Yes, I was thinking it could still fit in as drafted, because the language in condition in paragraph 6H.
Yeah.
But if the board is okay, I'm okay if you want to make the motion to
We can make a
approve this.
motion subject to.
Subject to, and I will just specify that drawing. I remember it, I remember the 22-foot contour line, so let's just add it. I'm sure that the applicant won't object because they were a part of that discussion. So what I will do is add it, make its own heading under K, have a numbered number 6 and reference that drawing,
That sounds,
if that's
I'm
okay with
sorry,
the
under
board.
K?
See, under conditions, right, we have the approved survey, the approved construction plans, approved construction protocol, approved septic plan, approved drainage plan, and then I will,
And K.
K's already in there.
under K, I'll add number 6
So it'll be
and
L?
say approved re-veg plan, and then 6 will become 7.
Okay.
Let's make a motion
All right,
to
so
subject to.
I will make a motion for Jason Miller, Suffolk County Tax Map 300-32-4-25 at 57 Seaside Avenue in Montauk, to approve the amended resolution as will be written, adding additional condition of approval after condition K.
no second.
Concur. Thank you. Next, we have Leslie Reckler at 257 Gerard Drive in Springs, Suffolk Tax Map number 300-42-2-19.2.
This application was a unanimous approval to demolish an existing residence and associated structures and construct a 1,685 square foot, two-story residence with 485 square feet of decking, 417 square foot porch, reconfigured driveway, and a new sanitary system on a parcel of land containing freshwater wetlands, dune land, beach vegetation. The address is 257 Gerard Drive in Springs. Looked over this decision. It was very well written, Jameson. Thank you. I make a motion that we approve the determination for Leslie Reckler, 257 Gerard Drive in Springs, Suffolk County Tax Map number 300-42-2-19.2 in its entirety.
Second.
Concur.
I concur.
Concur. Thank you. Nice chair.
Oh, here we go.
10:04.
I make a motion that the Zoning Board of Appeals adjourn their meeting at 10:04 on Tuesday, April 2nd, 2024.
Seconded.
Concur.
Concur.